Hello, friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The badge clipped to my chest read, Officer Ambrose Whitlock, Pine Ridge Police Department, Vermont. That October night in 2019 started like hundreds of others during my 12 years on the force. Coffee from the gas station on Route 7, lukewarm and bitter, sitting heavy in my stomach as I patrolled the industrial district on the edge of town. Pine Ridge wasn't much to look at anymore. Population barely pushing 8,000. Most of the factories shut down when manufacturing moved overseas in the early 2000s. What remained were skeletal buildings, broken windows staring out like dead eyes, and enough dark corners to hide just about anything. I was 38 then, divorced 3 years, living in a one-bedroom apartment above the Chinese restaurant on Main Street. My daughter Bethany visited every other weekend, though those visits were getting less frequent as she hit her teenage years and found better things to do than hang out with her old man. The night shifts suited me fine. Less traffic, fewer domestic calls, and the darkness had a way of making everything feel distant, manageable. The call came through dispatch at 11:43 p.m. Cornelius, our night dispatcher for the past 15 years, had this gravelly voice that always sounded like he'd just woken up, even at the start of his shift. Unit 7 got a report of suspicious activity at the old Brackenridge textile facility on Industrial Way. Caller says they heard what sounded like machinery running inside. Your closest. I knew the Brackenridge plant well. 5 stories of red brick and broken dreams, shut down in 2001 after a bankruptcy that left 200 people without jobs. The city kept saying they'd demolish it, but the money never materialized, so it sat there, slowly being reclaimed by nature and vandals. Kids broke in sometimes to drink or spray paint the walls. Urban explorers came through with their cameras, and occasionally we'd find someone trying to strip copper from the pipes. Copy that, Cornelius. En route. Probably just kids messing around. That's what I figured, Cornelius replied. But the caller, Mrs. Pemberton from the house on Maple, she was pretty insistent. Said it sounded like the old looms running. Mrs. Pemberton was 83 and lived alone in the last occupied house near the industrial district. Most of her neighbors had moved away years ago, but she'd stayed, stubborn as rust. She called in complaints maybe once a month, usually about rats or strange smells, but she wasn't the type to imagine things. The drive to Brackenridge took 8 minutes. The streets were empty except for the occasional cat darting across the road and a few parked cars outside Murphy's Tavern. As I turned onto Industrial Way, my headlights swept across the abandoned buildings lining both sides of the street. The Brackenridge plant loomed at the end, a massive brick monument to better times. Sure enough, I could see a faint light flickering in one of the third-floor windows. I parked the cruiser about 50 yards from the main entrance and grabbed my flashlight. The October wind cut through my uniform jacket, carrying the smell of rust and decay that always hung around the old industrial district. The main doors had been chained shut years ago, but I knew from experience that there were at least 3 other ways into the building if you knew where to look. As I approached the loading dock on the building's east side, I heard it. A rhythmic mechanical sound, muffled but distinct, coming from somewhere inside. It did sound like machinery, that steady thump, thump, thump of industrial equipment. But that was impossible. The power had been cut to the building years ago, and even if someone had jerry-rigged a generator, those old textile machines hadn't been maintained in 2 decades. they'd be rusted solid. The loading dock door was partially open, the chain that should have secured it lying on the ground, freshly cut with what looked like bolt cutters. I called it in to Cornelius. Unit 7, I've got forced entry at the Brackenridge plant, east loading dock. Heading inside to investigate. There's definitely some kind of mechanical sound coming from the building. Roger that, Ambrose. Want me to send backup? I thought about it for a moment. We only had 2 other officers on duty tonight, and they were probably dealing with the usual Friday night bar fights and domestic calls. Negative. I'll check it out first. Probably just someone running a generator, maybe stripping metal. I'll call if I need assistance. The loading dock opened into a cavernous space that had once been the receiving area. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating graffiti-covered walls and piles of debris. The mechanical sound was louder here, echoing off the concrete walls, and I could hear something else now, a low humming, almost like voices chanting, but too faint to make out words. I moved deeper into the building, following the sound. The old factory floor was a maze of rusted machinery, some of the textile looms still in place, their metal frames twisted and corroded. Pigeon droppings covered everything, and the air was thick with dust that made me want to cough. My footsteps echoed despite my efforts to move quietly. The sound was coming from the stairs leading to the upper floors. As I climbed, the metal steps groaning under my weight, I noticed something odd. The dust on the handrail had been disturbed recently, multiple handprints visible in my flashlight beam. Fresh footprints marked the dusty steps, lots of them, maybe a dozen different sets of shoes. The second floor was more of the same, abandoned machinery and decay, but the sound was getting louder. I could definitely hear voices now, a rhythmic chanting that matched the mechanical thumping. My hand moved instinctively to my service weapon, though I didn't draw it. Probably just some kind of party, I told myself. Kids these days did all sorts of weird stuff. When I reached the 3rd floor, I saw the light. It was coming from the far end of the factory floor, past rows of old looms flickering like candlelight. The chanting was clear now, though I couldn't understand the words. It didn't sound like English or any language I recognized. The mechanical sound was overwhelming here, that steady thump, thump, thump that seemed to make the whole building vibrate. I moved carefully between the looms, staying in the shadows. As I got closer, I could see figures moving in the light, maybe 15 or 20 people, all wearing what looked like dark robes or coats. They were standing in a circle around something, swaying in unison with the rhythm of the sound. That's when I saw her, Minerva Blackstone, the security guard from the chemical plant on the other side of town. I'd done a few joint patrols with their security team, and Minerva was always professional, serious, mid-40s with graying hair she kept in a tight bun. Seeing her here, in a robe, chanting with a group in an abandoned factory at midnight, made no sense at all. I stepped out from behind the loom, my flashlight beam cutting through the flickering light. Pine Ridge Police! Everyone, stay where you are! The chanting stopped immediately. The mechanical sound cut off like someone had thrown a switch. In the sudden silence, I could hear my own breathing, harsh and too loud. The group turned toward me as one, their faces hidden in the shadows of their hoods. All except Minerva, who had pushed her hood back, her face pale in my flashlight beam. "Officer Ambrose," she said, her voice steady but with something underneath, maybe fear, maybe something else. "You shouldn't be here. Minerva? What the hell is going on here?" Before she could answer, I heard it. A sound from behind the group, from whatever they'd been circled around. It was wet, organic, like something large moving through mud. The group parted, stepping back, and I saw what was in the center of their circle. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. It appeared to be one of the old textile looms, but it had been modified, altered in ways that made no mechanical sense. Pipes and tubes had been welded onto it, running from the machine to several industrial drums. The drums were transparent, filled with some kind of dark liquid that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. And there was something inside the liquid, something moving. "You need to leave," Minerva said, stepping toward me. "This doesn't concern the police. This is older than Pine Ridge, older than the factories. We're just maintaining the agreement." "Agreement? Minerva, what are you talking about? And what is that thing?" The liquid in the drums was definitely moving now, swirling, and I could see shapes forming and dissolving, like faces pressing against the inside of the containers trying to get out. The modified loom started to vibrate, that mechanical thumping starting up again. But now I could see that nothing was actually moving. The sound was coming from the drums themselves, like a heartbeat. One of the robed figures stepped forward, pulling back his hood. I recognized him too, Dr. Marcus Webb from Pine Ridge General Hospital, a respected physician who delivered half the babies in town over the past 20 years. "Officer Whitlock," he said, using my last name formally. "You're interrupting something that's been happening here long before these factories were built. The town's prosperity, such as it was, came from this. And now that the factories are gone, we maintain the compact to prevent consequences." "Doc, you're not making any sense." "What compact? What is this thing?" The liquid in the drums was agitated now, splashing against the sides. I could smell something chemical and wrong, like formaldehyde mixed with rotting vegetation. Several of the robed figures stepped back, and I heard someone whisper, "It knows there's an outsider." Minerva moved closer to me, her hand outstretched like she was trying to calm a spooked animal. "Ambrose, please. Just walk away. Forget you saw this. We've kept Pine Ridge safe for 70 years. The factory closures, the economic downturn. It could have been so much worse. We've prevented that. But if you interfere, if you break the circle of trust..." The drums began to shake violently. The dark liquid inside was boiling now, but without heat. I could see it clearly, faces in the liquid, dozens of them, pressing against the containers with expressions of anguish or rage, I couldn't tell which. The mechanical thumping grew louder, faster, like a terrified heartbeat. "Everyone back!" Dr. Webb shouted. "The containment is failing." The group scattered, running for the exits. Minerva grabbed my arm, trying to pull me with her. "Run, you fool! You've disrupted the binding." But I stood frozen, watching as hairline cracks appeared in the industrial drums. The dark liquid was seeping out, but instead of pooling on the floor, it was moving with purpose, reaching out in tendrils toward the fleeing figures. That's when the lights went out. Not just the candles or whatever they'd been using for illumination, but my flashlight too, the LED beam dying like someone had drained the battery instantly. The darkness was absolute, deeper than anything I'd experienced, like the light had never existed at all. In that darkness, I heard Minerva scream. The scream cut through the darkness like a physical thing, high and terrible, before being abruptly cut off. I fumbled for my radio, muscle memory guiding my hand in the absolute blackness, but when I pressed the transmit button, nothing happened. Dead, just like my flashlight. I could hear movement all around me, footsteps running, someone sobbing, and underneath it all, that wet, organic sound growing closer. The smell hit me then, stronger than before, like standing over an open grave filled with chemical waste. My eyes were adjusting, or at least I thought they were, but the darkness remained complete, supernatural in its totality. "Minerva!" I called out, my voice echoing strangely in the space, like the acoustics of the room had changed. "Where are you?" No response, just more of those wet sounds, now coming from multiple directions. I started moving, keeping one hand on the old textile loom beside me for guidance, trying to retrace my steps toward the stairs. The metal was cold under my fingers, but as I moved along it, the temperature began to change, growing warmer, then hot, then scaling. I jerked my hand back, and in that moment of disorientation I heard breathing right beside me. Not normal breathing, but labored, wrong, like lungs filled with fluid trying to draw air. "Who's there?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. The breathing continued, circling me. I reached for my service weapon, drew it, though what good it would do in this darkness, I didn't know. The weight of it in my hand was reassuring at least, something solid and real in this nightmare. Then, suddenly, light. Not electric light, but a sick, phosphorescent glow emanating from the spilled liquid on the floor. It spread slowly, like bioluminescent algae, casting everything in a dim, green radiance. What I saw in that ghostly light made me wish for the darkness again. The liquid hadn't just spilled, it had formed patterns on the floor, geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly, angles that seemed wrong, impossible. And where the liquid touched the old machinery, the metal was changing, not rusting but growing, sprouting organic-looking protrusions like tumors or coral. 3 of the robed figures were still in the room, pressed against the far wall. Dr. Hathaway, I recognized him now, even with his hood up, was muttering something over and over, a prayer or a chant. Minerva was on her knees near the modified loom, her hands pressed to her face, dark liquid seeping between her fingers. "Minerva!" I started toward her, but Dr. Hathaway grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "Don't touch her. She's been marked. The containment failed, and it needs a new vessel." "What are you talking about?" "She needs medical attention. She needs something we can't give her," he said, his voice hollow with defeat. 70 years we've kept it contained, fed it just enough to keep it dormant. But you broke the circle, disrupted the ritual. It's awake now, and it's hungry." Minerva lowered her hands from her face, and I stumbled backward. Her eyes were gone, replaced by pools of that dark liquid that seemed to swirl with its own inner light. When she spoke, her voice was layered, multiple tones speaking in unison. "The compact is broken," she said, but it wasn't really Minerva anymore. The feeding was insufficient. The vessel was weak. New terms must be negotiated. She stood, movements jerky like a marionette with tangled strings, and turned toward the modified loom. The machine was pulsing now, the metal parts flexing like muscle tissue, those organic growths spreading across its surface. "Minerva, fight it!" I shouted, but Dr. Hathaway pulled me back. "She can't hear you anymore. We need to get out before it fully manifests. Once it takes physical form, the whole town is at risk." "Takes form? What is this thing?" "Something that should have stayed buried," another voice said. I turned to see Cornelius, my dispatcher, stepping out from behind a row of machinery. He wasn't wearing a robe, just his usual rumpled uniform shirt and slacks, but he clearly knew exactly what was happening. "Hello, Ambrose. I'm sorry you had to see this. I tried to keep you away, but Mrs. Pemberton called the emergency line directly." "Cornelius, you're part of this?" He nodded sadly. "Someone from the department had to be, to make sure no one investigated too closely. Your predecessor knew, and his before him. It was supposed to be explained to you when you made sergeant, but..." He shrugged. "Budget cuts, positions eliminated. The knowledge wasn't passed on properly. The thing that had been Minerva was doing something to the loom now. Her liquid-covered hands moving over the growths, shaping them like clay. The machine was responding, changing, growing larger. I could see faces in the metal now, pressing outward like hands against a sheet. Silent screams distorted in the twisted surface. "We need to leave," Dr. Hathaway said urgently. "If we can get to the basement, there's an old containment circle there. It might hold until we can contact the others, bring in someone who knows the old words." But as we moved toward the stairs, the phosphorescent liquid on the floor began to move, flowing together, rising up in a column that blocked our path. It shaped itself into an approximation of a human form, but wrong, too tall, too many joints, fingers that split and reformed constantly. "No one leaves," it said through what might have been a mouth. "The compact is broken. New terms, new feeding, the town will provide." I raised my weapon, knowing it was useless but needing to do something. "Pine Ridge Police, stand down or I will fire." The thing laughed, a sound like glass breaking underwater. "Your authority means nothing here, Officer Ambrose Whitlock. I predate your laws, your town, your species. I was here when the indigenous people first found this valley, and they knew better than to wake me. But your kind, you built your factories above my resting place, drove your metals deep into the earth, disturbed my slumber." "The factories brought prosperity," Cornelius said quietly. "As long as they ran, as long as the machines turned, the vibrations kept it calm, sleeping. But when they closed, we had to replicate the patterns," Dr. Hathaway finished. "The mechanical sounds, the vibrations. And the feeding, it required feeding. I thought about all the missing persons cases over the years. Not many, but a steady trickle. Drifters mostly, people who wouldn't be missed. Now I understood where they'd gone. You've been murdering people? Feeding them to this thing?" "Not murder," the thing said, its form shifting, growing more solid. "Transformation. They become part of something greater, their essence sustaining me, keeping me from fully waking. But now the compact is broken. I am awake, and I am so very hungry." The modified loom behind us screamed. Not a mechanical sound, but an actual scream from the twisted metal and organic growth. The thing that had been Minerva was merged with it now, her form disappearing into the machine's expanding mass. The loom was moving, ancient gears turning despite having no power source, producing not fabric but something else, sheets of that dark liquid that solidified into shapes I couldn't quite focus on. "The basement," Dr. Hathaway whispered urgently. "Now!" We ran, not toward the block stairs but deeper into the factory floor, following Cornelius, who seemed to know another route. The phosphorescent light followed us, spreading across the ceiling like veins, pulsing with that same heartbeat rhythm. Behind us, I could hear the thing pursuing. Not footsteps, but a wet sliding sound, like a massive slug moving over broken glass. We reached a service elevator, the old cage-style freight lift that should have been rusted solid. But when Cornelius pulled the lever, it groaned to life, descending slowly, too slowly. Through the cage walls, I could see the thing approaching, its form now massive, filling the space between the machinery, absorbing everything it touched into its growing mass. "Faster!" I shouted, uselessly. "The building itself is fighting us," Cornelius said. "It's been feeding here so long, the structure is part of it now." The elevator shuddered to a stop 2 floors down, in what looked like a sub-basement I hadn't even known existed. The walls here weren't brick, but carved stone, far older than the factory above. Symbols were etched into every surface, not quite hieroglyphs, not quite runes, something that predated both. Dr. Hathaway led us to a circular room at the center of the basement. The floor was inlaid with metal, copper by the look of it, forming a complex pattern that made my eyes water to follow. He immediately began pulling containers from a hidden shelf, white ceramic jars that looked ancient. Salt, iron filings, and... He paused, looking at the last container. We're out of the binding agent. Minerva was supposed to bring it tonight. The building shook, dust falling from the stone ceiling. The thing was moving through the floors above us, searching. "What binding agent?" I demanded. Dr. Hathaway and Cornelius exchanged glances. "Blood," Cornelius said finally. "Willing blood, freely given. It's the only thing that completes the circle." I looked at the copper inlay, understanding dawning. "That's what you've been doing. The missing people. You said you fed them to it. But that's not all, is it? You've been using their blood to maintain this containment circle." "Their sacrifice kept the town safe," Dr. Hathaway said defensively. "1 or 2 a year to save thousands. It was a bargain our predecessors made, and we've honored it. Until tonight," I said bitterly. The stone ceiling cracked, a fissure running from one wall to another. That phosphorescent liquid began seeping through, dripping onto the copper circle and making it smoke and corrode. "It's found us," Cornelius said unnecessarily. I looked at the 2 men, these respected members of our community who'd been murdering people for years, feeding them to some ancient horror to keep it dormant. Part of me wanted to arrest them both, assuming we survived. But the larger part was focused on the immediate problem of that survival. "How much blood?" I asked. "What?" Dr. Hathaway looked confused. "For the circle." "How much blood do you need?" "A pint, maybe more. But it has to be freely given, that's the key. The willing sacrifice is what gives it power." I rolled up my sleeve. "Then take it." Both men stared at me. "Ambrose, you don't understand," Cornelius began. "Once you are part of the compact, you can never leave. You'll be bound to this thing, to keeping it contained for the rest of your life. The alternative being it gets loose and kills everyone in Pine Ridge. Essentially, yes." The ceiling gave way completely, and the thing flowed into the room like a liquid avalanche. But when it hit the copper circle, it recoiled, steam rising from its surface. The binding was still partially working, but without the blood component it wouldn't hold for long. Dr. Hathaway moved quickly, pulling out a medical kit from the same hidden shelf. His hands were steady despite the chaos around us, years of medical training overriding the terror of the moment. The thing circled the copper boundary, testing it, probing for weaknesses while making sounds that weren't quite words, weren't quite screams, but something between that made my teeth ache. "This is insane," I said as he tied a tourniquet around my upper arm. "We're performing a blood ritual in a basement while that thing tries to eat us." "Welcome to the real Pine Ridge," Cornelius said grimly, spreading salt along the copper circle's edge where the creature's essence had begun to corrode it. "The town you thought you knew was always just the surface." The needle went in clean, and I watched my blood flow into an ancient ceramic bowl that Dr. Hathaway had inscribed with those same impossible symbols. The moment the first drops hit the bowl, the air in the room changed. It became thicker, charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. The thing noticed too. Its assault on the circle intensified, and I could see it more clearly now in the phosphorescent glow of its own form. It had absorbed parts of the factory above, mechanical components jutting from its fluid mass, gears turning within transparent flesh, pipes becoming veins that pumped that dark liquid through its ever-shifting body, and faces. So many faces pressed against its surface from within, mouths open in silent screams. I recognized some of them, missing persons from old case files I'd reviewed, people I'd assumed had just left town. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, trying to focus on something other than the needle in my arm and the nightmare circling us. The original compact was made in 1952, Dr. Hathaway said, carefully collecting my blood. When they built the factory, the excavation went too deep, broke through into something ancient. The thing woke, killed 17 workers in one night before the survivors managed to contain it. They brought in someone from the old country, someone who knew the old ways. My grandmother, Cornelius added quietly. She was from Romania, knew about things like this. She taught them how to keep it sleeping. But the price, he trailed off. The price was blood, I finished, and you've been paying it ever since. The factory owners knew, Dr. Hathaway continued, watching the bowl fill. They incorporated it into their business model. The occasional workplace accident. The worker who didn't show up one day. As long as the machines ran and the feeding continued, the thing slept, and the town prospered. And when the factories closed, we had to improvise. The fellowship was formed, those of us who knew the truth. We maintained the rituals, the feeding schedule. It wasn't murder, Ambrose, it was survival. One life to save thousands. I wanted to argue, to point out that it was exactly murder, but the thing chose that moment to change tactics. Instead of attacking the circle directly, it began to pull back, condensing, solidifying into something that looked almost human if humans were made of liquid metal and nightmares. It stood maybe 9 feet tall, its surface reflecting our terrified faces in distorted fragments. "The new vessel is here," it said, its voice coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The blood giver, the willing sacrifice. You will do nicely, Officer Ambrose Whitlock." "That's not how this works," Dr. Hathaway said firmly, adding something from one of the ceramic jars to my blood. The mixture began to glow with a soft, white light. "The blood is freely given to maintain the binding, not to create a new vessel." The thing laughed, that broken glass sound again. "The old compact is broken. I make the rules now. And I choose him." It reached out, and despite being outside the circle, I felt its touch, cold fingers of thought probing at my mind. Images flooded my consciousness. The town as it was before the factories, just a small settlement in a valley that everyone avoided. The indigenous peoples who'd lived here had known to stay away from this particular spot, had warnings in their oral histories about the thing that slept beneath the earth. Then the industrialists came, ignorant and greedy, and built their empire on top of an ancient horror. I saw the first awakening, workers torn apart, their blood painting the factory walls. The desperate negotiations, the first compact sealed with 13 willing sacrifices who gave themselves to save the town. I saw decades of carefully managed horror, the fellowship growing, changing, passing the burden from generation to generation. And I saw what would happen if the binding failed completely. Pine Ridge consumed, every living thing absorbed into the creature's mass, and then it would spread. Hungry after its long sleep, taking town after town until someone found a way to stop it or it consumed everything. "Almost ready," Dr. Hathaway said, but his voice seemed very far away. The thing was in my head now, showing me more. It showed me Minerva, still conscious somewhere within its mass, screaming endlessly in a place where sound didn't exist. It showed me the others it had absorbed over the years, all still aware, still suffering, fuel for its existence. "You can end their suffering," it whispered directly into my thoughts. "Become my vessel willingly and I'll release them. They'll finally know peace." "Don't listen to it," Cornelius warned, but how could I not? Those faces in its mass weren't just victims. They were people with names, families who'd never known what happened to them. Old Mrs. Thorne from the flower shop who disappeared 3 years ago. Young Timothy Garrett, the college student who'd supposedly transferred to another school mid-semester. They were all there, all suffering. How many? I asked aloud. What? Dr. Hathaway looked up from the bowl where he was mixing my blood with the other components. How many people have you fed to this thing over the years? He and Cornelius exchanged glances. Since 1952? Maybe 200. But Ambrose, you have to understand, without those sacrifices, the death toll would have been in the thousands. 200 people. 200 souls trapped in that thing's mass, suffering for decades. I thought about my daughter Bethany, safe at her mother's house, unaware that her town was built on a foundation of human sacrifice. I thought about all the missing persons cases that would never be solved, all the families who would never have closure. There has to be another way, I said. There is, the thing said, still speaking directly to my mind. Become my willing vessel, and I will leave this place. I will take you and go deep, back to sleep, far from any human settlement. Your sacrifice will save them all. It's lying, Dr. Hathaway said urgently. These things always lie. That's their nature. But looking at it, at the faces of the victims pressing against its surface, I wasn't sure it was lying. Maybe it was tired of this existence too, tired of being fed scraps, tired of being bound to this place. Maybe it just wanted to return to wherever things like it came from. The blood's ready, Dr. Hathaway announced, lifting the bowl. The mixture inside glowed like liquid starlight. We need to pour it on the circle, reseal the binding. For how long? I asked. Another year? Another 70 years? How long before someone else breaks the compact and we're right back here? For as long as we can maintain it, Cornelius said. It's not perfect, but it's the only solution we have. I stood up, the tourniquet making my arm throb. The thing watched me with eyes that weren't eyes, waiting. In its mass, I could see Minerva's face, her real face, not the possessed version, and she was looking at me with such desperation, such pain. There's another way, I said quietly. Ambrose, no. Cornelius stepped forward, but I held up my hand. Every year, you sacrifice innocence to keep this thing contained. Every year, more people disappear, more families destroyed. When does it end? It doesn't, Dr. Hathaway said simply. That's the point. It never ends. That's the price of keeping everyone else safe. I walked to the edge of the copper circle, careful not to cross it. The thing moved closer, its mass shifting eagerly. If I agree, I said to it, you'll release the others. All of them? The ones still whole enough to release, it responded. And for the first time, I heard something like honesty in its voice. Some have been part of me too long. But the recent ones, yes, they can be freed. And you'll leave Pine Ridge? With you as my vessel, yes. We will go deep, where the earth is warm and the pressure is great. You will sleep and dream, and in dreaming, feed me. It won't be pleasant, but it won't be the agony they experience. It gestured to the faces in its mass. Ambrose, you can't trust it. Dr. Hathaway moved toward me with the bowl of blood, ready to complete the binding. I had to make a choice. Maintain the status quo, knowing that more people would die, more families would suffer, and one day another cop would stand where I stood, facing the same horrible decision. Or take the chance that this thing, this ancient horror, might actually keep its word. I thought about Bethany again. She was 15 now, smart, planning to go to college, maybe become a teacher like Mrs. Thorne had been with her flower arranging classes at the community center. In 3 years, she'd be 18, old enough to be told the truth about Pine Ridge if she stayed. old enough to potentially become part of the fellowship, to carry this burden. Did I want that for her? Did I want her to spend her life feeding people to a monster to keep it contained? "Show me," I said to the thing. "Show me that you can release them." It shifted, and suddenly Mrs. Thorne's face pushed forward from its mass, becoming three-dimensional, gaining definition. Her eyes focused on me, truly seeing me for the first time in 3 years. "Officer Whitlock?" Her voice was weak, confused. "What? Where am I?" "The flowers." I was arranging flowers. "It's okay, Mrs. Thorne," I said, my voice breaking. "You're going to be okay." The thing pulled her back into itself, and she screamed, a very human sound that cut right through me. "You see," it said, "they are still themselves, still aware. I can free them, but only if you take their place." "Don't do this," Cornelius pleaded. "Think about your daughter." "I am thinking about her," I said. "I'm thinking about the world I want to leave for her. And it's not one where we feed people to monsters." I looked at the bowl in Dr. Hathaway's hands, glowing with my blood mixed with their binding agents. Then I looked at the thing, waiting patiently for my decision. "If I do this," I said, "I need guarantees. The people you release, they need to be returned safely. No tricks, no taking them back later." "Agreed," it said immediately. "And Pine Ridge is off limits. Forever. You never come back here. Never send any part of yourself here." "Agreed. And my daughter, she never knows about this. None of them do. Let them think I died in the line of duty, a hero cop who saved the town. That would be the truth," it said, and there was something almost like respect in its tone. Dr. Hathaway set down the bowl, his shoulders sagging. "You're really going to do this? Someone has to end the cycle," I said. "Might as well be me." I took out my phone, typing quickly. A message to Bethany. "Love you more than all the stars in the sky, baby girl. Be good for your mom. Dad's always watching over you." I hit send before I could change my mind. Then I stepped across the copper circle. The moment my foot crossed the copper boundary, everything changed. The air became thick like syrup, and I felt the thing's consciousness slam into mine with the force of a freight train. But instead of the violent possession I expected, it was more like sinking into deep water, cold and crushing but oddly peaceful. "Ambrose, no!" Cornelius lunged forward, but Dr. Hathaway held him back. "It's too late," the doctor said quietly. "The choice is made." The thing's mass flowed around me, not touching yet, but close enough that I could feel its alien coldness radiating against my skin. In my mind, I heard its voice, no longer monstrous, but almost gentle. "You are braver than the others," it said. "They always fought. You choose." "Keep your word," I said aloud, my voice surprisingly steady. "Release them." The creature began to pulse, its form shifting and contracting. One by one, shapes emerged from its mass. Human forms stumbling forward, gasping as if surfacing from deep water. Mrs. Thorne collapsed to the stone floor, her flower print dress the same one she'd been wearing 3 years ago. Timothy Garrett, the college kid, fell to his knees, retching up black liquid. Others followed, maybe a dozen in total, all alive, all free. Minerva was the last to emerge. The creature seemed reluctant to let her go, but finally she pulled free with a wet, tearing sound. She dropped to the ground, her security uniform soaked in that dark substance, but her eyes were her own again, terrified but human. "Get them out," I told Cornelius and Dr. Hathaway. "Get them all to the hospital. Tell them there was a chemical leak. Mass hallucination, whatever you need to say." Dr. Hathaway was already moving, checking pulses, helping people to their feet. But Cornelius stayed where he was, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. "Your daughter," he said, "will grow up in a town free from this," I finished. "That's all that matters." The thing was closing in now, its mass condensing around me. I could feel it probing at the edges of my consciousness, looking for the way in. It wasn't painful, not yet, just pressure, like something too large trying to fit into too small a space. "The compact," the creature said, its voice now coming from inside my own head. "You must speak it, make it binding," I understood. This wasn't just about me sacrificing myself. It was about creating a new agreement, one that would hold even after I was gone. "I, Officer Ambrose Whitlock, freely give myself as vessel to this ancient thing," I said, the words coming from somewhere deep inside, maybe from the creature itself, or maybe from some part of me that understood what needed to be said. "In exchange, Pine Ridge and all its people are released from the compact of 1952. No more feeding, no more sacrifices. The debt is paid in full with my willing surrender." The copper circle on the floor began to glow, not with the white light of the blood mixture, but with a deep red radiance. The symbols on the walls lit up in response, and I realized this room had been built for this exact purpose. Not just to contain the creature, but to witness and seal new compacts. "Witnessed," Cornelius said formally, though his voice was thick with emotion. "Witnessed," Dr. Hathaway echoed from where he was helping Timothy Garrett to his feet. "Witnessed and bound," the creature said through me, and I felt the words burn themselves into reality. The absorption began in earnest then. The creature's mass flowed over me, into me, through me. I expected agony, but instead it was like falling asleep in the coldest winter, numbness spreading from my extremities inward. I could feel my consciousness being pushed down, compressed, making room for something vastly older and larger than myself. Through increasingly distant eyes, I saw Cornelius helping the freed victims up the stairs. Minerva was the last to go, turning back to look at me. Her lips moved, saying something, maybe "thank you," maybe "I'm sorry," but I could no longer hear external sounds. The creature was showing me things as we merged. Its true nature, not evil as I'd thought, but simply other. It came from spaces between spaces, from the dark before the first stars. It fed on consciousness not from malice but from need, the way we feed on food. Earth had been an accident, falling through a crack in reality during some prehistoric era, and it had been trapped here ever since, as much a prisoner as the people it had absorbed. "We will go deep," it promised as my vision began to fade. "Deeper than any human has gone. The pressure will keep us sleeping. Your dreams will sustain me for centuries, and you will not suffer as the others did. This I promise, as you promised to free them." I wanted to ask if I'd dream of Bethany, of Pine Ridge, of the life I was leaving behind, but I could no longer form words, could no longer distinguish between my thoughts and its thoughts. We were becoming something new, neither human nor creature, but a fusion bound by the compact. The last thing I saw with my own eyes was Dr. Hathaway sealing the door to the ritual room, tears streaming down his face. The last thing I heard with my own ears was the sound of sirens approaching the factory, coming to deal with the chemical leak that had affected so compact, how it's held, how Pine Ridge has flourished in my absence. No more disappearances, no more feeding. Just a normal town with a strange history that fewer and fewer people remember. Minerva wrote a report, apparently. Said I died saving her and others from a chemical leak at the old factory. Said I was a hero. There's a plaque with my name on it at the station, and every year on the anniversary they hold a small ceremony. Bethany attends. The creature shows me, though she's older now, has kids of her own. She tells them about their grandfather, the hero cop who saved the town. It's not the worst ending, I suppose. Not the one I would have chosen if I'd woken up that October morning knowing what the night would bring. But given the alternatives, given what would have happened if the cycle had continued, I can live with it. Or whatever you call this existence, neither living nor dead, neither human nor monster. Sometimes when the pressure is just right and the Earth's magnetic field aligns in certain ways, I can almost reach out, almost touch the world above. I've learned not to try. It disturbs the creature, makes it hungry, and that hunger could break the compact if it grows too strong. So I stay quiet, stay still, and dream my dreams in the deep darkness. The story should end here, with my sacrifice, with Pine Ridge saved. But stories, real stories, don't end cleanly. Because last week, or last year, or last decade, time is so hard to track down here, the creature showed me something that made whatever's left of my human consciousness scream in warning. Another town, 3 states over, has started building a new industrial complex. The excavation is going deep, deeper than safety regulations should allow. The creature can feel it through the rock, the vibrations traveling along fault lines and underground rivers. They're going to find another one. Another thing like my companion, sleeping in the deep places, waiting to be disturbed. The creature tells me there are many of them scattered across the world, most sleeping. Some already awakened and contained by compacts we'll never know about. It tells me that what happened in Pine Ridge was not unique, that there are fellowships in other towns, making other bargains, feeding other horrors to keep them contained. But this new excavation, they don't know what they're about to uncover. There's no one to warn them, no fellowship to manage the awakening. The creature and I are too far away, too deep, bound by our compact to Pine Ridge alone. All we can do is feel the vibrations getting stronger, sense the sleeping thing beginning to stir. I try to dream warnings, try to send messages through the underground networks of water and stone. But I'm just one small consciousness merged with an ancient horror, hiding in the deep places to keep one town safe. My reach is limited, my voice is silent, and somewhere above, another tragedy is about to begin. The creature tells me not to worry, that it's not my responsibility anymore. My compact was with Pine Ridge, and that compact holds. But I was a cop for 12 years, sworn to protect and serve, and that oath didn't end when I stepped across the copper circle. So I keep trying, keep pushing against the boundaries of our prison, hoping that somehow, somewhere, someone will hear the warning and stop the digging before it's too late. But down here in the deep darkness, where pressure makes time meaningless and dreams are the only currency that matters, I'm learning that some horrors can't be prevented, only managed. And sometimes the best you can hope for is that when the awakening comes, there's someone like me. Someone willing to make the hard choice, someone willing to step across the circle and say the words that need to be said. Until then, I dream. I dream of Bethany and her children. I dream of Pine Ridge, safe in its ignorance. I dream of Minerva and the others I freed, living their lives, probably never talking about what happened in the factory. And sometimes, when the weight of the earth above threatens to crush whatever humanity I have left, I dream of that October night when I was just Officer Ambrose Whitlock, thinking the worst thing I'd face was teenagers' vandalism at an abandoned factory. The creature stirs, hungry, and I feed it another dream. This one is about spring in Pine Ridge, when the apple blossoms fill the air with sweetness and the kids play in the streets until the fireflies come out. It's a good dream, a peaceful dream, and the creature settles and Kaz satisfied for now. We sink a little deeper, the pressure increasing, making sure we'll sleep for a very long time. My sacrifice wasn't for nothing. Pine Ridge is free. the compact holds. But somewhere above, I can still feel those vibrations, that other excavation getting deeper, getting closer to something that should stay buried, and all I can do is dream and hope that when it wakes, someone will be ready. My name is Officer Horatio Blackwood, and I've been with the Ashford County Sheriff's Department in rural Kentucky for 16 years. Started when I was 25, fresh out of the Army, thinking I'd seen everything there was to see about human nature during my 2 tours in Afghanistan. But nothing, absolutely nothing in my military experience prepared me for what I encountered at 1428 Willowbrook Lane on that humid Thursday evening in September 2021. The call came through dispatch at 8:47 p.m., just as the sun was painting the horizon in shades of rust and purple. I was finishing up a report from a minor fender bender on Highway 60, sitting in my cruiser with the windows down, letting the thick Kentucky air wash over me. September in Ashford County meant the tail end of summer's oppressive heat, when the humidity clung to you like a second skin, and the cicadas sang their endless chorus from the trees. Unit 12, we've got a welfare check request at 1428 Willowbrook Lane. Dispatch crackled through. Neighbors concerned about Mrs. Cordelia Ashworth. Says he hasn't seen her in about 5 days, newspapers piling up, mail overflowing. I knew the address. Willowbrook Lane was in the older part of town, where Victorian-era houses stood like aging sentinels among ancient oak trees. These homes had been built in the 1890s when Ashford County was booming from tobacco money, before the industry collapsed and left the town to slowly fade into rural obscurity. Most of the houses there were either meticulously maintained by elderly residents who'd lived in them their whole lives or falling apart from neglect. Unit 12 responding, I said, already turning my cruiser toward the historic district. Any previous calls to that address? Negative, Horatio. Clean record. The concerned party is a Mr. Barnabas Thorne, lives at 1426 right next door. He's waiting outside if you need to speak with him. Barnabas Thorne. I knew him by reputation, though we'd never formally met. 78 years old, retired professor from the community college, widower for the past decade. The kind of neighbor who kept meticulous care of his lawn and knew everyone's business within a 3-block radius. If he was concerned enough to call for a welfare check, something was definitely off. The drive to Willowbrook Lane took 12 minutes through the winding roads that connected our small downtown to the historic district. I passed the old tobacco warehouses, long converted to antique shops and artist studios that attracted weekend tourists from Louisville. The Dollar General, where half the town did their shopping. The abandoned Rexall drugstore with its faded ghost sign still visible on the brick wall. This was small-town America in all its fading glory, a place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were hard to keep. Or so I thought. Willowbrook Lane was exactly as I remembered it from previous patrols. Enormous houses set back from the street, their wraparound porches and ornate gingerbread trim speaking of a more prosperous era. The street itself was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 cars to pass, lined with oaks so old their branches formed a canopy overhead, blocking out most of the dying sunlight. Number 1426 was easy to spot. Barnabas Thorne was standing in his front yard, still dressed in a crisp white shirt and pressed khakis despite the evening hour. He was a thin man, almost skeletal, with white hair combed precisely over a spotted scalp. When he saw my cruiser, he immediately started walking toward the street, his cane tapping against the sidewalk in an agitated rhythm. I parked and got out, adjusting my duty belt out of habit. The weight of my equipment, radio, weapon, flashlight, cuffs, was familiar and reassuring. The air was thick with the smell of honeysuckle and something else. something sweet and cloying that I couldn't quite identify. Officer Blackwood? Barnabas's voice was cultured, with just a hint of the Kentucky drawl that marked him as a local despite his educated bearing. Thank goodness you're here. I'm terribly worried about Cordelia. Mr. Thorne, I nodded, pulling out my notepad. When did you last see Mrs. Ashworth? He leaned heavily on his cane, his pale blue eyes troubled behind wire-rimmed glasses. Sunday evening, around 6 o'clock. She was on her porch, tending to her flowers. We exchanged pleasantries about the weather. Nothing seemed amiss. And that was 5 days ago? Yes, sir. Now, Cordelia is a creature of habit. Every morning at 7 sharp, she's out getting her newspaper. Every evening at 6, she waters her flowers. I haven't seen her do either since Sunday. Her newspapers are piling up. Look. He pointed with his cane toward the house next door. Number 1428 was a Queen Anne Victorian. 3 stories of faded yellow paint with dark green trim. The wraparound porch was cluttered with potted plants, all of them wilting in the heat. Sure enough, I could see several newspapers in their plastic bags scattered on the front walk. The mailbox was stuffed so full that the door couldn't close properly, envelopes and advertisements spilling onto the ground. Does Mrs. Ashworth have family nearby? Anyone who might have picked her up? Barnabas shook his head. She's 93 years old, officer. Her husband passed in 2004, and her only son lives in Seattle. They're not close. He calls on holidays, sends a card on her birthday, but that's about it. She's lived alone in that house for 17 years. Any health issues you're aware of? She's remarkably spry for her age, Barnabas said, and I caught a note of admiration in his voice. Still drives herself to church every Sunday, does her own shopping. Though he paused, seeming to consider his words carefully. Though what, Mr. Thorne? Well, lately she's seemed a bit distracted. Forgetful, perhaps. Last month I found her in my backyard at 3 in the morning. Said she was looking for her cat. But Cordelia hasn't had a cat in 5 years. When I reminded her, she seemed confused, disoriented. I walked her home, and the next day she acted as if nothing had happened. Early-stage dementia, possibly. It would explain the sudden absence. Maybe she'd wandered off, gotten lost. But that didn't explain why her car was still in the driveway. A pristine 1998 Buick LeSabre that probably had less than 30,000 miles on it. I'm going to check on her, I said. Would you mind waiting here in case I need any additional information? Of course, officer, I'll be right here. I walked up the cracked concrete path to 14228, noting the overgrown grass that hadn't been cut in at least 2 weeks. The porch steps creaked under my weight, and that sweet, cloying smell grew stronger. Up close, I could see that several of the potted plants weren't just wilting. They were dead, their leaves blackened as if burned. The front door was painted dark green, with an oval glass window etched with flowers. I knocked firmly. Mrs. Ashworth? This is Officer Blackwood with the Sheriff's Department. We're just checking to make sure you're okay. No response. I knocked again, harder this time. Mrs. Ashworth? Cordelia? If you can hear me, please come to the door or call out. Still nothing. I tried the doorknob, and to my surprise, it turned easily. The door swung open on well-oiled hinges, revealing a dark foyer. That sweet smell hit me like a physical force, mixed now with something else, something that made my stomach turn. It wasn't the smell of death exactly. I'd encountered that enough times to recognize it immediately. This was different, organic but wrong somehow, like fruit that had fermented past the point of decay into something else entirely. Mrs. Ashworth? I called out, stepping into the foyer. Sheriff's Department. I'm coming in to check on your welfare. The house was dark, all the curtains drawn despite it still being light outside. I pulled out my flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom to reveal a surprisingly well-maintained interior. The foyer opened into a parlor on the left and a staircase on the right. Victorian furniture, all dark wood and faded velvet, filled the spaces. Every surface was covered with doilies and knickknacks, porcelain figures and framed photographs spanning decades. I moved through the parlor first, my flashlight beam dancing across the walls covered in floral wallpaper that had probably been there since the house was built. A grandfather clock stood silent in the corner, its hands frozen at 11:47. The dust was thick on some surfaces but disturbed on others, as if someone had been moving through the space recently but only touching certain things. "Mrs. Ashworth," I called again, moving toward what I assumed was the kitchen. The kitchen was a step back in time, with a 1950s-era refrigerator humming loudly, and a gas stove that looked even older. Dishes were piled in the sink, covered in mold. A calendar on the wall was still turned to August, with various appointments written in shaky handwriting. Doctor's appointment on the 15th. Church bazaar on the 22nd. Remember pills written on every single day. On the kitchen table was an array of pill bottles, at least a dozen of them, all prescribed to Cordelia Ashworth. I recognized some of the medications: blood pressure, diabetes, something for memory that suggested her doctor was already treating her for cognitive decline. But the pills were scattered across the table. Many of them spilled from their bottles, as if someone had swept their arm across the surface in frustration or confusion. A notepad sat among the pills, covered in handwriting that started neat and gradually devolved into barely legible scrawls. I leaned in to read it, and what I saw made my skin crawl. "He comes at night, through the walls, through the floors. He whispers things. Not real, doctor says not real, but I can see him. Barnabas knows. Barnabas has always known. The basement. Don't go to the basement. He lives in the basement now. They're all in the basement. All of them. Waiting." The last entry was just one word, written over and over again until it filled the entire page. Hungry. I keyed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I'm inside the residence. No sign of Mrs. Ashworth yet, but there are indications of mental distress. Continuing to search." "Copy that, Unit 12. Do you need backup?" I considered it. The house felt wrong. Every instinct I'd developed over 16 years of police work was screaming at me that something was off. But it was probably just an elderly woman with dementia who'd wandered off or was hiding somewhere, confused and frightened. "Negative. Dispatch. I'll advise if status changes." I moved back through the house toward the staircase. As I climbed to the second floor, the smell grew stronger, and I noticed something else. The temperature was dropping. Outside, it was still in the 80s, humid and sticky. But here on the second floor, it felt like late autumn, cold enough that I could see my breath misting in the flashlight beam. The second floor had 4 bedrooms and a bathroom. I checked each room methodically. The master bedroom was frozen in time, with a 4-poster bed made up with a handmade quilt, more photographs on every surface, and a thick layer of dust indicating no one had slept there in weeks. The other bedrooms were similarly untouched. One set up as a sewing room, another as a study. The third completely empty except for boxes stacked against one wall. The bathroom was where things got strange. Or stranger, I should say. The bathtub was full of water, but the water was black, completely opaque, and it wasn't reflecting my flashlight beam. It absorbed the light like a void. The smell was overwhelming here, that sweet, rotting scent that made me gag. There were clothes on the floor, a floral house dress and undergarments, laid out as if someone had just stepped out of them. I reached out with my pen to touch the black water and immediately pulled back. It wasn't water, it was too thick, too viscous, moving with a sluggish current despite nothing disturbing it. And it was warm, body temperature warm, in a room that was cold enough to see my breath. I backed out of the bathroom, my hand instinctively moving to my service weapon. 16 years on the force, and I'd never drawn my gun on a bathtub before, but something about that black substance made every alarm bell in my head ring at once. I keyed my radio again, keeping my voice low and steady. Dispatch, Unit 12. The situation is unusual. No sign of the resident yet, but I'm finding evidence of possible hazardous materials in the home. Might need to contact County Health Department. Copy that, Unit 12. Should I send backup? I hesitated. What would I tell them? That I was spooked by some black water in a tub? That an old lady's rambling notes had me on edge? Stand by, dispatch. Let me complete my search first. There was one place I hadn't checked yet. The basement. According to Cordelia's frantic notes, that's where he lived, where they were waiting. I'd been in enough basements during welfare checks to know they were usually just full of cobwebs and forgotten Christmas decorations. But given everything else I'd seen in this house, I wasn't taking any chances. I made my way back downstairs, the temperature rising slightly as I descended. The basement door was in the kitchen, painted the same faded yellow as the walls, with an old-fashioned slide bolt locked from the kitchen side. That was odd. Why would someone lock a basement door from the outside? I slid the bolt back, and the door swung open on its own, as if pushed by air pressure from below. The smell that wafted up was different from the sweet decay I'd noticed earlier. This was earthier, like freshly turned soil mixed with something medicinal, almost antiseptic. A wooden staircase descended into absolute darkness. "Mrs. Ashworth?" I called down. "Cordelia? This is Officer Blackwood. If you're down there, please answer me." Silence. But not the normal silence of an empty room. This was the kind of silence that felt intentional, like something was actively choosing not to respond. I clicked my flashlight to its highest setting and started down the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. The basement was larger than I expected, extending under the full footprint of the house. The floor was hard-packed dirt, unusual for a house this old and well-maintained. The walls were field stone, sweating moisture in the beam of my flashlight. And it was warm down here, uncomfortably warm, like standing too close to a furnace. The space had been divided into sections with hanging sheets, like makeshift rooms. I pushed through the first sheet and found what looked like a root cellar, shelves lined with mason jars. But when I looked closer, the jars didn't contain preserves or vegetables. Each one held something floating in clear liquid. I picked one up, angling it toward my flashlight, and nearly dropped it when I realized what I was looking at. Teeth, human teeth, dozens of them, some with fillings still visible, others yellowed with age. The label on the jar was written in that same shaky handwriting from the notepad upstairs. Margaret Thompson, 1987. I set the jar down carefully and examined the others. Harold Morrison, 1993. Louise Garrett, 2001. Benjamin Cross, 2009. Names and dates going back decades. There had to be at least 40 jars, each one containing teeth, and each one carefully labeled with a name and year. My mind was racing. These names, some of them sounded familiar. Missing persons cases, old obituaries. I couldn't place them exactly, but something about them rang distant bells in my memory. I took out my phone to photograph the jars, but there was no signal down here, and the camera kept refusing to focus, as if the air itself was too thick. I pushed through another hanging sheet and found myself in what looked like a makeshift living space. A cot with military-style blankets neatly made. a small table with a kerosene lantern. And sitting in a rocking chair, facing away from me, was a figure in a faded house dress. "Mrs. Ashworth?" I said, moving around to see her face. "Ma'am, are you—" I stopped mid-sentence. It was Cordelia Ashworth, or at least it had been. She was sitting perfectly still, her eyes open but filmed over with a milky substance. Her skin had a waxy quality, like she'd been embalmed, but her chest was moving, barely perceptible rises and falls. She was breathing, but everything else about her suggested she'd been dead for days. "Ma'am?" I reached out to check her pulse, and her head snapped toward me with a speed that made me jump back. Her filmed-over eyes seemed to focus on me, though I didn't understand how that was possible. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice coming out in a whisper that sounded like wind through dry leaves. "He doesn't like visitors during feeding time." "Who doesn't, Mrs. Ashworth?" "Who's he?" She smiled then, and I saw that her teeth were gone, her gums black and receded. "Mr. Thorne, of course, dear Barnabas. He's been so patient with me, 70 years of patience. But I'm almost empty now. That's why you're here, isn't it, to be the next one?" Before I could respond, I heard footsteps on the stairs behind me. Slow, measured steps accompanied by the tap of a cane. I turned to see Barnabas Thorne descending into the basement, but something was different about him. In the stark beam of my flashlight, his skin seemed to shift and move, as if something was crawling just beneath the surface. "I do apologize, Officer Blackwood," he said, his cultured voice unchanged despite his transformation. "I had hoped Cordelia would last a few more weeks. It's so inconvenient when they expire before I've made proper arrangements for a replacement." I drew my weapon, training it on him. "Stay right there, Mr. Thorne. Don't move." He laughed, a dry sound like papers rustling. "Oh, officer, your gun won't help you here. I'm far too old for bullets to matter. Would you like to know how old? I came to Ashford County in 1887, though I looked different then. I've worn so many faces, lived in so many houses on this street. The Thorne identity has been useful for the past 15 years, but I think it's time for a change." He took another step down, and I saw his face clearly for the first time since entering the basement. The skin was moving because it wasn't really skin at all. It was thousands of tiny insects, beetles or roaches, moving in perfect coordination to maintain the illusion of a human face. As I watched in horror, part of his cheek collapsed inward, revealing nothing but hollow darkness beneath before the insects swarmed to repair the gap. "What are you?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I'm a survivor," he said simply. "A traveler who got stranded in this backwater town over a century ago. I feed on human essence, consciousness, whatever you want to call it. But I'm civilized about it. I take only the old, the dying, those who won't be missed. One every few years, stretched out over months of feeding. Cordelia here has sustained me for almost 6 months, haven't you, dear?" Cordelia made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been a death rattle. "The others before her, they all lived on this street. The jars you found, souvenirs. I like to remember them all. They become part of me, you see, their memories, their experiences. Margaret Thompson could make the most wonderful apple pie. Harold Morrison knew everything about jazz music. Each one enriched me." "You're talking about murder," I said, trying to keep him talking while I figured out what to do. "Multiple murders over decades. Murder?" He seemed genuinely offended. "I extended their lives. Cordelia would have died 6 months ago from a stroke. I kept her alive, fed on her slowly, carefully. She felt no pain, only dreams. Beautiful dreams of her youth, her husband, her son when he was young and still loved her. Isn't that better than dying alone in a hospital bed? That's not your choice to make, isn't it? I've been making that choice for over a century, and the town thrives because of it. Do you know why Ashford County has one of the lowest crime rates in the state? Why your children are safe on the streets? Because I'm here, taking only what I need, keeping the real monsters at bay. Real monsters? He smiled, and the insects forming his lips pulled back too far, revealing the void beneath. Oh, Officer Blackwood, you have no idea what's out there. Things that would tear through this town like tissue paper. But they stay away because this is my territory. I'm the devil you know, the one who takes only the old and dying, who maintains the balance. Without me, Ashford County would be a feeding ground for things far worse. I kept my weapon trained on him, though I was beginning to understand how useless it was. Those people upstairs, in the jars, their families never knew what happened to them. Their families thought they died peacefully in their sleep or wandered off with dementia. I gave them closure, even if it was a lie. Better than the truth, don't you think? Better than knowing Grandma was slowly consumed by an ancient being wearing the face of the nice old man next door. A sound from behind me made me turn. Cordelia had stood up from her chair, moving with jerky, unnatural movements like a marionette. Her filmed eyes were fixed on me, and black liquid was beginning to seep from her mouth. The same substance I'd seen in the bathtub upstairs. "She's nearly depleted," Barnabas said conversationally. "Perhaps another day or two at most. That's why I called you here. I need a replacement, and you're perfect. 41 years old, recently divorced, no children, parents deceased. Who would really miss you, Officer Blackwood?" He knew about my divorce, my family situation. How long had he been watching me, planning this? My department would miss me. They'd investigate. Would they? Or would they find your patrol car at the bottom of Ashford Lake, along with a suicide note explaining how the divorce and job stress finally got to you? I've been doing this for over a century, officer. I know how to make people disappear. Cordelia was moving closer, that black liquid now pouring from her mouth, nose, and eyes. It was pooling on the dirt floor, spreading toward me like it had a will of its own. I backed up, but there was nowhere to go. The basement walls were closing in, and Barnabas was still blocking the stairs. "Here's what's going to happen," Barnabas said, his voice taking on a hypnotic quality. "You're going to put down your gun. You're going to sit in that chair, and you're going to let me feed. It won't hurt, I promise. You'll dream beautiful dreams while I slowly consume everything you are. And in 70 or 80 years, when you're just a hollow shell like dear Cordelia here, I'll find someone else. The cycle continues, the town stays safe, and everyone lives happily ever after." The black liquid had reached my boots, and I could feel it trying to seep through the leather, cold and invasive. Cordelia was only a few feet away now, her mouth opening wider than humanly possible, revealing that she was hollow inside, just a skin suit filled with that black substance. I had to make a choice. Try to fight my way past Barnabas and probably fail, or find another way out. That's when I remembered the kerosene lantern on the small table. Kerosene, flammable, in a basement full of old wood and fabric. "You're right," I said, lowering my weapon slightly. "You're right about everything. But answer me one thing first. If you're so old, so powerful, why do you need to hide down here? Why the elaborate charade with Cordelia?" Barnabas tilted his head, the insects under his skin shifting with the movement. "Because, Officer Blackwood, even ancient beings need to follow certain rules. I can only feed on the willing or the dying. Cordelia invited me 6 months ago when she was having her stroke. She thought I was there to help. That invitation, that moment of willing acceptance, is what allows me to feed. Without it, I'm just a collection of insects wearing a human suit, surviving on drops of essence freely given. So, you need permission, I said, taking a small step toward the table with the lantern. You can't just take what you want. The old laws still bind, even here, he admitted. But you'll give permission. They always do in the end, when the black tide rises and the dreams begin. Even now, you can feel it, can't you? The temptation to just let go, to sink into the darkness where nothing hurts anymore. He was right. The black liquid was doing something to me, making my thoughts fuzzy, my will weaker. I could feel Cordelia's dreams leaking into my mind, memories of summer picnics and birthday parties, her son's first steps, her husband's laugh. They were beautiful, seductive, so much better than my own recent memories of divorce papers and empty apartments. But then I remembered something else. My training. During a hostage negotiation course, they'd taught us about Stockholm Syndrome, about how captors use psychological manipulation to break down resistance. This was the same thing, just with a supernatural twist. I bit down hard on my tongue, using the pain to clear my head, and lunged for the kerosene lantern. No! Barnabas moved faster than any elderly man should be able to, but I was already smashing the lantern against the wooden support beam. Kerosene splashed everywhere, soaking into the old wood, the hanging sheets, the dirt floor. The smell of fuel overwhelmed everything else. I pulled out my lighter, holding it up. Back off, both of you, or I'll burn this whole place down. Barnabas froze, and even Cordelia stopped her advance. The black liquid around my feet began to recede, pulling back like the tide. You'd burn too, Barnabas said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Maybe, but you've been here for over a century, right? All your jars, all your memories, all your carefully preserved trophies. They'd all burn, and you, a collection of insects? I'm betting fire is one thing you can't survive. The insects under his skin began moving faster, agitated. Parts of his face kept collapsing and reforming, like he was having trouble maintaining his shape. You don't understand what you're doing. Without me, this town will survive just fine, I interrupted. We don't need a monster to protect us from other monsters. That's what law enforcement is for. That's what community is for. We protect each other. Such naive optimism, he sneered, but he took a step back toward the stairs. You have no idea what's coming. The barriers I've maintained, the agreements I've made with things far worse than me. When I'm gone, they'll come. And your guns, your laws, your community won't stop them. We'll deal with that when it happens. I kept the lighter flame steady, despite my shaking hand. Right now, I'm dealing with you. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave. Tonight. Leave Ashford County and never come back. Take your insects and find somewhere else to exist, somewhere far from here. And if I refuse, I lowered the lighter toward a kerosene-soaked sheet. Then we all burned together. I've got nothing left to lose. My ex-wife got the house, the savings, even the dog. My parents are dead. I've got a studio apartment and a job that's slowly killing me. You think threatening me with death scares me? Some days it sounds like a relief. I was bluffing mostly, but he didn't know that. And the beauty of a good bluff is selling it with absolute conviction. Barnabas studied me for a long moment. Then, slowly, his human shape began to dissolve. The insects scattered, thousands of them, maybe millions, spreading across the basement walls like a living shadow. His voice came from everywhere and nowhere, a whisper of wings and chittering. You'll regret this, Horatio Blackwood. when the first child goes missing, when the shadows grow teeth, when the things I've kept at bay come calling, you'll remember this moment. You'll remember that you had a devil who only took the dying, and you traded him for devils who will take everyone. The insects swarmed up the stairs, a black river of clicking legs and beating wings. I heard them flow through the house above, the sound like a hurricane of whispers. Then, gradually, silence. Cordelia collapsed the moment Barnabas left. The black liquid poured out of her like she was a punctured balloon, spreading across the floor in a pool that reflected no light. I approached carefully, kneeling beside her. She was still breathing, but barely. "Mrs. Ashworth?" "Cordelia, can you hear me?" Her eyes, no longer filmed over, focused on me. For a moment she was lucid, completely herself. "Officer," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The basement. Burn it all. Don't let them find." She gripped my hand with surprising strength. "The jars, the names, they're not all dead. Some are sleeping. In other houses, other basements, he had disciples. Who? Which houses?" But she was fading. "Burn it," she said again. "Promise me." "I promise," I said, squeezing her hand. She smiled, a real smile despite everything, and then she was gone. 93 years old, 6 months of being slowly consumed by an ancient evil, and she still had enough strength left to warn me. I carried her body upstairs, laying her gently on her bed. Then I went back to the basement with a can of gasoline from my cruiser. I soaked everything: the jars, the sheets, the cot, the wooden beams. The whole basement reeked of fuel by the time I was done. I should have called it in, should have waited for the fire department, the coroner, the whole official process. But I'd made a promise to a dying woman, and more importantly, I believed her. If Barnabas had disciples, if there were others like him, the evidence in this basement couldn't become public knowledge. It would cause panic, or worse, it might draw them here. I lit a road flare and tossed it down the stairs. The basement went up like it had been waiting to burn. The old wood, dried by decades of that unnatural heat, caught instantly. I watched from the yard as the flames spread up through the house, making sure they consumed everything before I called it in. "Structure fire at 1428 Willowbrook Lane," I reported, my voice steady. "Elderly resident deceased, appears to be natural causes. Fire started in the basement, possibly old wiring." By the time the fire department arrived, the house was fully engulfed. They managed to keep it from spreading to the neighboring homes, but 1428 was a total loss. Cordelia's body was recovered, and the coroner ruled it natural causes, complicated by the fire. No one questioned it. Why would they? She was 93, living alone, with a history of health problems. The investigation into the fire was perfunctory. Old house, old wiring, tragic accident. Case closed. But I couldn't let it go that easily. Over the next few weeks, I quietly researched the names I'd seen on those jars. Margaret Thompson, reported missing in 1987, never found. Harold Morrison, supposedly moved to Florida in 1993, but no forwarding address. Louise Garrett, death certificate filed in 2001, but no burial record. Benjamin Cross, missing person case from 2009, still open. 43 names in total that I could remember. 43 people who had lived on or near Willowbrook Lane over the past century. All elderly, all alone, all forgotten. I also researched Barnabas Thorne. The identity went back 15 years, just like he'd said. Before that, nothing. But I found something interesting in the Historical Society archives, a photograph from 1953 showing the Willowbrook Lane Community Association. Standing in the back row was a man who looked exactly like Barnabas, except his name was listed as Theodore Blackstone. Another photo from 1921 showed the same face, this time named Edmund Cordwell. How many identities had he worn? How many times had he reinvented himself, always staying on the same street, always preying on the elderly? 3 weeks after the fire, I got a call to another welfare check. This time on Sycamore Street, 2 blocks from Willowbrook. Mrs. Eleanor Fitzgerald, 87 years old, hadn't been seen in 4 days. Her neighbor, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Morse, was concerned. I went alone. The house was another Victorian, smaller than Cordelia's, but with the same sense of age and isolation. Mrs. Fitzgerald was in her living room, sitting in a recliner, staring at nothing. She was alive, but unresponsive, and there was a sweet smell in the air that made my skin crawl. "How long has she been like this?" I asked Patricia, who had followed me in. "I'm not sure." "A few days, maybe? She's been declining for months. Such a shame." "But don't worry, officer, I've been taking care of her." I turned to look at Patricia more carefully. She was maybe 50, pleasant-faced, wearing a cardigan despite the warm evening. Her smile was kind, maternal even. But there was something in her eyes, a darkness that seemed to move independently of the light. "Taking care of her how?" "Oh, you know. Bringing meals, helping with medication, keeping her comfortable. It's what neighbors do, isn't it? We look after each other." I noticed a row of mason jars on the mantel, each one filled with what looked like preserves. The labels were handwritten. Eleanor's Strawberry, 2021. Eleanor's Peach, 2021. Eleanor's Apple, 2021. "Mrs. Morse," I said carefully, "how long have you lived in this neighborhood?" "Oh, all my life. My family has been here for generations. We're part of the foundation of this community, you might say. Disciples." Cordelia had warned me about disciples. "I'm going to need to call an ambulance for Mrs. Fitzgerald," I said, reaching for my radio. "I don't think that's necessary," Patricia said, and her voice had changed, taken on that same hypnotic quality Barnabas had used. "She's comfortable here. Peaceful. Why disturb that?" I felt the pull of her words, the temptation to agree, to leave, to forget. But I'd felt it before, and I was ready for it this time. I called for the ambulance anyway and backup. Patricia's pleasant expression never changed, but something shifted in the air around her. "You're the one who drove out Mr. Thorne, aren't you? He told us about you before he left. Told us you'd probably come sniffing around. Us? Oh yes, there are several of us. His children, you might say, though not in any biological sense. He taught us the old ways, how to feed without killing, how to sustain ourselves on the essence of the dying. We're not monsters, Officer Blackwood. We're symbiotes. We give them peaceful dreams while taking what we need to survive." "You're parasites," I corrected, "and you're under arrest." She laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of bone. "For what?" "Bringing food to an elderly neighbor, keeping her company. You have no evidence of any crime." She was right, legally speaking. Without the jars in Cordelia's basement, without Barnabas's confession, I had nothing that would hold up in court. An elderly woman in decline and a neighbor who helped her. That's all anyone would see. The ambulance arrived, and the paramedics loaded Mrs. Fitzgerald onto a stretcher. She would die 3 days later in the hospital, never regaining consciousness. Natural causes, the doctor said. End-stage dementia. Patricia Morse disappeared that same night. Her house was empty when I went to check on her. No forwarding address, no trace except for those jars on Eleanor's mantel. I took them as evidence, but the lab found nothing unusual, just fruit preserves with slightly elevated levels of salt. Over the next month, I identified 3 more potential disciples. An elderly man named Robert Ashton, who ran the Historical Society and had an unusual interest in genealogy records. A young woman named Victoria Crane, who worked at the nursing home and always volunteered for the night shift with the terminal patients. A teenager named Timothy Blackwood, no relation despite the shared surname, who did yard work for all the elderly residents on the east side of town. I couldn't prove anything against any of them, but I watched them, and they knew I was watching. One by one, they left town. Robert Ashton retired to Arizona. Victoria Crane took a job in another state. Timothy Blackwood went off to college early. Maybe they were just normal people making normal life choices. Or maybe they were rats fleeing a sinking ship. The months that followed were quiet. No more mysterious disappearances. No more welfare checks that turned into nightmare scenarios. I started to think maybe I'd won. Maybe I'd actually driven them all out. Then the real problem started. December brought the first disappearance. Not an elderly person this time, but a child. 8-year-old Emma Hartley, taken from her bedroom while her parents slept in the next room. No signs of forced entry, no struggle, just an empty bed and an open window. The whole department mobilized, search parties combing the woods, divers checking the lake, Amber Alerts across 3 states. We found her 3 days later, wandering along Highway 60, dehydrated but physically unharmed. But she wouldn't speak, wouldn't tell us where she'd been. She just kept drawing the same picture over and over. A figure made of shadows with too many arms, reaching through her window. 2 weeks later, it happened again. 10-year-old Marcus Jennings, gone from his backyard in broad daylight. His mother had gone inside for just a minute to answer the phone. This time, we found him in the old Brackenridge factory, or what was left of it after the fire I'd set months ago. He was sitting in the ruins, talking to something no one else could see, negotiating in a language that wasn't quite words. When Child Services finally got him to talk, he said the Shadow Man had promised to take him somewhere better, somewhere without rules or bedtimes or vegetables. Classic predator grooming, the psychologist said. But I knew better. I'd driven out Barnabas and his disciples, and something worse had moved in to fill the vacuum. I went back to 1426 Willowbrook Lane, to the house where Barnabas had lived as Theodore Blackstone. It had been sold to a young couple from Louisville, but they'd moved out after just 3 weeks, claiming the house was wrong. It stood empty now, a for sale sign crooked in the overgrown yard. I broke in through the back door, not caring about proper procedure anymore. The house felt different from when Barnabas had lived there, colder somehow, like all the warmth had been sucked out of it. In the basement, I found what I was looking for. Barnabas's real records, hidden behind a false wall. Journals dating back to 1887, written in a spidery hand that gradually modernized over the decades. They told his story, how he'd come to Ashford County following something he called the traveling dark, how he'd established himself as a buffer between our world and things that wanted in. He wasn't lying about protecting the town. The journals contained detailed accounts of negotiations with entities that fed on fear, creatures that existed in the spaces between seconds, things that saw human consciousness as a delicacy. For over a century, Barnabas had maintained a balance. He fed on the elderly and dying, yes, but his presence had kept out far worse predators. Like a wolf marking its territory, keeping out the bears and mountain lions. Now the wolf was gone, and the apex predators were moving in. One journal entry from 1963 stood out. The hollow children came again last night, scratching at the barriers. They hunger for young minds, fresh and untainted by life's disappointments. I reinforced the ward stones, but they grow stronger each decade. If I should ever leave or be driven out, the barriers will fall within a year. God help whoever remains. The Wardstones. I found references to them throughout the journals. 5 stones buried at specific points around Ashford County, creating a pentagram of protection. Barnabas had maintained them with his own essence, feeding them power drawn from his victims. Without him, they were just rocks in the ground. I spent the next week finding them. One was under the courthouse steps, a piece of black obsidian inscribed with symbols that hurt to look at. Another was in the cemetery, buried beneath a gravestone so old the name had worn away. The third was in the foundation of the elementary school. The fourth at the crossroads where Highway 60 met County Road 15. And the fifth was in the lake, 30 feet down, wrapped in chains. All of them were cracked, their power fading. Whatever protection they'd offered was almost gone. I tried to fix them, following Barnabas's instructions from his journals. But they required something I couldn't give. Essence freely given. The same thing Barnabas had harvested from his victims. I wasn't a creature like him. I couldn't feed the stones what they knighted. More children went missing. We found them all, eventually, but they came back changed. Quiet, withdrawn, speaking to invisible friends. The child psychologist brought in from Louisville quit after 2 weeks, saying the children's conditions were beyond her expertise. The FBI got involved, looking for a human trafficking ring, but found nothing. I knew what I had to do. It took me 3 weeks to track him down. Barnabas, or whatever he was calling himself now, had relocated to a small town in West Virginia. I found him living as Martin Ashcroft, caring for an elderly woman with late-stage cancer. The same routine, the same careful feeding, the same maintenance of balance. He wasn't surprised to see me. "Officer Blackwood," he said, still maintaining that cultured accent. "I wondered when you'd come. How many children have the Hollow Ones taken?" 7 so far. We got them back, but they'll never be the same. The Hollow Ones leave marks on young souls. Those children will grow up seeing through the veils, never quite fitting into the normal world. Some will go mad, others will become, like me, eventually, creatures caught between worlds. "Come back," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Fix the Wardstones. Protect the town." He laughed, that dry, rustling sound. "Come back? After you burned down my home, drove out my disciples, threatened me with destruction? Why would I do that?" "Because you're not evil," I said, hating myself for admitting it. "You're a parasite, yes, but you're a careful one. You take only what won't be missed, and you protect your territory. The things moving into Ashford County now, they don't have your restraint." "True," he admitted, "but I have a new territory now. This town needs protection too. Then bring your disciples back. Establish a network, protect both towns." He studied me for a long moment, the insects under his skin shifting thoughtfully. "You're suggesting I expand my operation? Create a franchise, as it were?" "I'm suggesting a compromise. You and your disciples can return to Ashford County, but with conditions. No one under 70, no one with family who'll miss them. And full transparency with me. I'll know who you're feeding on and when. Any deviation and I'll burn you all out again. And in exchange, I'll help you maintain the Wardstones. I'll make sure you're not disturbed. I'll even help you create new identities when needed." It was wrong. Every part of it was wrong. I was literally making a deal with a devil to keep out worse devils. But those 7 children's empty eyes haunted me, and I knew more would be taken if something wasn't done. Barnabas agreed, eventually. He returned to Ashford County as Benjamin Cordwright, a retired professor renting a house on Maple Street. Patricia Morse came back as Patricia Morrison. The others trickled in over the following months, taking new names, new faces, but the same old roles. The ward stones were repaired and strengthened. The hollow children retreated, unable to penetrate the barriers. No more children disappeared. The town returned to normal, or what passed for normal. I became the liaison, the one who knew the truth. When someone elderly and alone was reaching their end, I'd make sure Barnabas or one of his disciples was there, offering comfort, taking only what would have been lost anyway. It sickened me, but the alternative was worse. 5 years have passed since that night at Cordelia Ashworth's house. I'm 46 now, still working night shifts, still alone. But I sleep better knowing the ward stones are strong, knowing the children of Ashford County are safe, even if that safety comes at a price. Sometimes I visit the graves of those who've been fed upon. Cordelia Ashworth, Eleanor Fitzgerald, and a dozen others since the new arrangement began. I leave flowers and apologies they'll never hear. I tell myself they would understand, or that they would choose this if they knew what the alternative was. But that's just something I tell myself to sleep at night. Last week, Barnabas came to me with news. He's been monitoring other towns, other places where the barriers are weak. The hollow children aren't the only things trying to get in. There are worse entities, things that feed on more than just consciousness or fear. Things that could unravel reality itself if they found a way through. We need to expand, he said. More disciples, more territories, more ward stones. A network across the country, maybe the world. The old barriers are failing everywhere, and something needs to replace them. And you want my help. I want your blessing. You're the only human who truly understands the necessity of what we do. Others would see us as monsters and try to destroy us, not realizing they'd be dooming themselves. I thought about it for a long time. About the moral implications of helping ancient parasites spread across the country. About the elderly who would be slowly consumed in their final days. About the families who would never know the truth about their loved ones' deaths. Then I thought about those 7 children. About little Emma Hartley's drawings of the Shadow Man with too many arms. About what would happen if the hollow children or worse things found a way into our world permanently. All right, I said, but we do this my way. Full oversight, strict rules, and the moment you step out of line, I'll find a way to end you all. Barnabas smiled with his borrowed face. I wouldn't expect anything less, Officer Blackwood. So that's where we are now. I'm writing this all down because someone needs to know the truth in case something happens to me. In case the balance fails and the barriers fall. In case someone else needs to make the same impossible choice I did. If you're reading this, it probably means I'm dead or missing. It means the arrangement has failed and the ward stones are weakening. It means you need to decide, do you try to destroy Barnabas and his kind, knowing what will replace them? Or do you continue the compromise, becoming complicit in a horror to prevent a greater horror? There's no right answer. There's only the choice between devils you know and devils you don't. The welfare check on Cordelia Ashworth was supposed to be routine. Just another call on another Thursday night. Instead, it became the night I learned that sometimes the real monsters are the ones we invite in to protect us from the monsters outside. And sometimes that's the best option we have. I still work the night shift in Ashford County. Still respond to welfare checks and domestic disputes and all the mundane calls that make up small-town policing. But now, I also check the ward stones, monitor Barnabas's feeding schedule, and make sure the barriers hold. Because in the end, that's what police work really is. Maintaining the balance between order and chaos, between safety and freedom, between the devils we know and the ones we don't. Even if it means becoming a devil yourself. Officer Archibald Grimsby here. 22 years I've worn this badge for the Millbrook Township Police Department in rural Pennsylvania, and I thought I'd seen every kind of strange call that could come through dispatch on a night shift. Domestic disputes where both parties swear the house itself was attacking them. Reports of lights in the sky that turn out to be weather balloons, or don't turn out to be anything at all. Even that incident 5 years back with the traveling carnival that wasn't on any official schedule and disappeared before dawn, leaving only pressed grass and the lingering smell of cotton candy mixed with sulfur. But nothing, and I mean nothing in those 2 decades of experience, prepared me for what I found in Riverside Park on that foggy October night in 2020. Even now, sitting here in my apartment above the old hardware store, typing this out with fingers that still sometimes shake when I remember, I'm not sure I believe what happened. But I've got the scars to prove it, and the department's sealed records that nobody talks about, and Officer Thaddeus Crow, who was there for the end of it and still won't make eye contact with me. It was Thursday, October 15th, 11:43 p.m. when the call came in. I was parked behind the abandoned Tasty Freeze on Route 30, not sleeping exactly, but not entirely awake either. That liminal state you hit around midnight when you've been working nights for too long, where the radio chatter becomes white noise, and the darkness outside the cruiser feels like it's pressing against the windows. Unit 7, we've got a report of a suspicious vehicle at Riverside Park, North Parking Area. Caller says it's been there since around 8 p.m., interior light on, but no one visible inside or around the vehicle. I jerked fully awake, spilling lukewarm coffee on my uniform. Riverside Park closed at sunset, which was around 6:30 this time of year. Anyone there after hours was trespassing, though usually it was just teenagers looking for a place to drink or hook up. Unit 7 responding, I said, starting the cruiser and pulling onto the empty highway. Description of the vehicle? Black sedan. Caller couldn't give make or model. Says there's something wrong about it, but wouldn't elaborate. Something wrong about it. In my experience, when civilians used vague language like that, it usually meant they'd seen something that didn't fit their understanding of the world, and their brain was struggling to process it. Like the time Mrs. Kowalski called about a wrong-looking dog in her yard that turned out to be a bear cub. Or when teenage Tommy Morrison reported a weird bird that ended up being a drone someone had decorated to look like a pterodactyl as a prank. Riverside Park was 12 minutes from my position, taking the back roads that cut through the farmland. October in rural Pennsylvania meant corn mazes and pumpkin patches during the day, but at night those same fields became walls of darkness that seemed to swallow the patrol car's headlights. The fog didn't help, rolling in thick from the Susquehanna River, turning the world into a collection of vague shapes and suggestions. The park entrance was marked by 2 stone pillars that had been there since the 1930s, built by the CCC during the Depression. The metal gate that should have been closed and locked was standing open, one side bent outward like something had pushed through from the inside. Fresh damage, too, the metal still showing bright scratches where the paint had been scraped away. I called it in. Unit 7 at Riverside Park. Gates been forced open. Proceeding to North Parking Area. Copy that. Unit 7. Backup available if needed. Stand by. Dispatch. Let me assess first. The access road wound through thick trees, mostly oak and maple, their leaves already turned and falling, creating a carpet that crunched under the cruiser's tires. The fog was thicker here, fed by the river that ran along the park's eastern border. My headlights could only penetrate maybe 20 feet ahead, turning everything into a tunnel of gray mist and shadowy tree trunks. The north parking area was a gravel lot that could hold maybe 30 cars on a busy summer day. Tonight, there was only one vehicle, parked diagonally across 3 spaces right in the center, like someone had driven in fast and stopped without caring about the painted lines. It was a sedan, definitely black or dark blue, hard to tell in the fog and darkness. But even from 50 feet away, I could see why the caller had said something was wrong about it. The interior light was on, just like reported, but it wasn't the normal yellow-white of a dome light. This was different, a pale blue-green glow that seemed to pulse rhythmically, like a heartbeat or breathing. I parked 30 feet away, angling the cruiser so my headlights lit up the sedan's rear. The license plate was covered in mud or something else, completely obscured. No make or model badges that I could see. In fact, the car seemed almost generic, like someone had tried to draw a sedan from memory and gotten the proportions slightly off. The trunk was too long, the roof too low, the windows at angles that didn't quite match any manufacturer I knew. Unit 7, I've got eyes on the vehicle, I reported. Running the plate is negative, it's obscured. Interior light is on, but I'm not seeing any occupants from my position. Approaching on foot. Copy that, Unit 7. Be careful, Arch. That was Meredith on dispatch tonight. Been working there since before I joined the force. She only used first names when she was worried. I grabbed my flashlight, checked my sidearm was secure, and stepped out into the fog. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees since I'd started my shift, and the moisture in the air made it feel colder still. My breath came out in clouds that mixed with the fog, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear the river running high and fast from recent rains. The gravel crunched under my boots as I approached the sedan, flashlight beam playing. Across its surface, the paint job was strange. Not quite black, not quite blue, but something that seemed to shift between the two depending on the angle of the light. No dust, no dirt, except for whatever was covering the license plate. The car looked like it had just rolled off the assembly line, if assembly lines made cars with subtly wrong proportions. Police? Anyone in the vehicle, make yourself known. No response. The blue-green light continued to pulse steadily from within, approximately once every 3 seconds. I moved closer, beam focused on the driver's side window. The interior was wrong. Not dramatically, not obviously, but wrong in a way that made my brain struggle to process what I was seeing. The seats looked normal enough, black leather or vinyl, but they were positioned at angles that didn't make sense for human bodies. The steering wheel was too large and mounted too high. The dashboard had controls and displays that didn't correspond to anything I'd seen in 22 years of looking into vehicles. And there was something on the driver's seat. Not a person, but a shape. A shadow that seemed to exist independently of any light source. It had depth and mass, but no definable edges, like someone had cut a person-shaped hole in reality and forgotten to fill it with anything. I tapped on the window with my flashlight. Police! I need you to step out of the vehicle. The shadow shape didn't move, but something else did. The pulsing light suddenly intensified, flooding the car's interior with that blue-green glow, and I saw them. Objects scattered across the back seat and floor. A woman's purse, patent leather, looked expensive. A child's backpack with cartoon characters I didn't recognize. A man's wallet, open, bills visible. A wedding ring, a pair of glasses. A shoe, just one, a red high heel that looked brand new. Personal effects. At least a dozen different people's belongings scattered around like trophies or discarded remnants. My hand moved to my radio, but before I could call it in, the driver's door opened. It opened wrong. Not swinging out on hinges, but sliding sideways and slightly upward, like it was following a track that existed in more dimensions than 3. The shadow shape flowed out, maintaining its vaguely human outline, but moving like liquid smoke. Where it touched the gravel, the stones began to dissolve, not melting, but simply ceasing to exist, leaving perfectly circular voids in the ground. Stop right there! I drew my weapon, training it on the thing, though I had serious doubts about whether bullets would affect something that looked like a hole in the world. It stopped. Not like a person stopping, but like a video pausing, going from motion to absolute stillness instantly. Then it spoke, or something like speaking. The words didn't come from any visible mouth, but seemed to form directly in my head, bypassing my ears entirely. Officer Archibald Grimsby, born May 15, 1973, badge number 2847. Recently divorced, daughter Elizabeth attending Penn State. Son Marcus in rehab for the third time. You eat dinner alone at Rosario's Diner every Tuesday. You feed the stray cats behind your apartment building. You still keep your wedding ring in your jacket pocket. Every detail was correct. Things no one else knew, like the wedding ring. Things I'd never told anyone, like the cats. This thing had been watching me, studying me for how long? "What are you?" I managed to ask, my voice steadier than I felt. "I am a collector," it responded in that same not voice that seemed to originate inside my skull. "I study. I preserve. I catalog the interesting variations in your species. The items in the car, those belong to people. Where are they?" The shadow shape tilted what might have been its head. "Collected. Preserved. They were interesting. The woman, Lavinia Coldwell, had synesthesia. She could taste colors. Fascinating neural variation. The child, Benjamin, was beginning to manifest precognitive abilities. Very rare in your species. The others had their own unique qualities. Lavinia Coldwell. I knew that name. She'd been reported missing 3 weeks ago from Harrisburg, about an hour south. The child must be Benjamin Winters, the Amber Alert from last week. This thing had been taking people, collecting them like specimens. "Where are they?" I repeated, finger on the trigger. "Safe. Preserved. Would you like to see?" Before I could answer, the world changed. Not gradually, but instantly. Like someone had switched channels on reality. I was no longer standing in the parking lot of Riverside Park. I was somewhere else, somewhere that my brain couldn't quite process. The space was simultaneously vast and cramped, extending in directions that didn't exist in normal geometry. The walls, if they were walls, were made of the same nothing substance as the shadow figure, and they were lined with what I can only describe as display cases. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, each containing a person frozen in a moment of time. I saw Lavinia Coldwell, mid-30s, dark hair, frozen in the act of laughing at something. Her eyes were aware, tracking my movement, but the rest of her was absolutely still. Next to her, young Benjamin Winters, maybe 8 years old, caught in the motion of running, 1 foot off the ground, arms spread wide. His eyes were terrified, pleading. They were all alive, all conscious, all trapped in single moments that went on forever. "Beautiful, aren't they?" the shadow thing said, its not voice carrying a tone that might have been pride. Each one preserved at their most interesting moment. Lavinia, at the exact instant she realized she could taste the sunset. Benjamin, in the microsecond before his first true precognitive vision. Perfect specimens of human variation. I fought against the nausea rising in my throat, trying to focus on my training, on finding a way out of this nightmare. The space had no visible exits, no doors or windows, just endless rows of frozen people in their transparent prisons. Some I recognized from missing persons reports spanning years. Others were strangers, but all had that same aware, terrified look in their eyes. "This is kidnapping," I said, surprised my voice worked at all in this impossible place. "Imprisonment. Murder." "Murder?" The thing seemed genuinely puzzled. "They're all alive. Perfectly preserved. They'll never age, never die, never experience pain or loss again. I've saved them from entropy. You've trapped them in hell. Hell is a human concept based on suffering. They're not suffering. They're simply paused, existing in a single eternal moment. I looked at Benjamin Winters again, that 8-year-old boy frozen mid-run, and saw tears that would never fall suspended on his cheeks. Their eyes say different. Consciousness without time is admittedly an adjustment, but they'll adapt. In a few centuries, they won't even remember what movement felt like. Centuries. This thing planned to keep them like this for centuries. Take me back, I demanded. Right now. But you haven't seen the full collection yet. I have specimens from your entire state. Would you like to see the law enforcement section? I have 3 other officers, though none as interesting as you. What makes me interesting? The shadow figure moved closer, and I felt the temperature drop even further. Where it passed, reality seemed to thin, showing glimpses of things behind or beyond the normal world. Colors that didn't exist, geometries that shouldn't be possible, movements in more than 3 dimensions. You've seen things, it said. That carnival that wasn't supposed to exist. The house on Maple Street that sometimes has a different number of rooms. The woman who walks her dog in Memorial Cemetery every night, even though she died in 1987. You see these things, acknowledge them, file them away, and keep functioning. Most humans break when faced with evidence that their reality isn't as solid as they believe. You just adapt. It was right. I had seen things. Things that didn't make it into official reports. Things that other officers pretended didn't happen. Millbrook Township had always been strange, sitting on some kind of confluence of weirdness that nobody talked about but everyone knew was there. That's why I've been watching you, Officer Grimsby. You're a rare specimen, someone who can perceive beyond the veil without losing sanity. I've been waiting for the right moment to collect you. And that moment is now? Oh no, not yet. You're not at your most interesting point. That will come later, when you have to make an impossible choice. But I wanted to meet you first to see if you were worth waiting for. The space around us shifted, and suddenly we were back in the parking lot at Riverside Park. The transition was so abrupt that I stumbled, my flashlight beam swinging wildly. The sedan was still there, still glowing with that blue-green light, but now the passenger door was open too, and someone was getting out. Not another shadow thing, but a woman. Human, or at least human-looking. She was tall, maybe 6 feet, with ash-blonde hair that fell to her waist, and eyes that were the same blue-green as the car's interior light. She wore a black dress that seemed to be cut from the same nothing material as the shadow creature. And when she moved, she left brief after-images, like she existed a few milliseconds out of sync with normal time. This is Lavinia, the shadow thing said. Not the Lavinia Coldwell from my collection, but my Lavinia, my partner in this endeavor. Hello, Officer Grimsby, Lavinia said, and her voice was perfectly normal, which somehow made everything worse. She had a slight southern accent, genteel and old-fashioned. I apologize for my companion's abruptness. He gets excited about new specimens and forgets his manners. You're human? She laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of glass. I was. About 300 years ago. Now I'm something else. Something better. I help him understand humanity, help him choose which specimens are worth preserving. You help him kidnap people. I help him save them from the mundanity of normal existence. Do you have any idea how boring most human lives are? Work, eat, sleep, reproduce, die. The ones we take are special. They have gifts, variations, qualities that make them worth preserving. And what gives you the right to make that choice? The same thing that gives your species the right to put animals in zoos, butterflies in display cases, flowers in herbariums. We're simply more advanced, with a better understanding of what's worth preserving. I heard sirens in the distance. Someone else must have called in about the sedan, or maybe dispatch had sent backup when I didn't check in. The Shadow Thing and Lavinia heard them too. "We should go," Lavinia said to her companion. "The others will complicate things." "Not yet," the Shadow Thing replied. "I want to give Officer Grimsby something to think about." It moved toward me again, and this time I did pull the trigger. 3 shots center mass, or where center mass would be on a normal person. The bullets passed through it without effect, disappearing into whatever void it was made of. It didn't even slow down. "I'm going to make you an offer," it said, stopping just inches from me. This close, I could see through it to the other side, but what I saw wasn't the parking lot. It was that impossible space again, the collection, hundreds of frozen people in their eternal moments. Join us. Become like Lavinia. Help us choose who to preserve. In exchange, we'll release the children, all of them, Benjamin and the 6 others under the age of 16. There are 7 children in your collection? 7 so far. They're harder to find with truly interesting variations, but when we do find them, they're spectacular. Little minds that see the world in ways adults have forgotten. But I understand your species has a particular attachment to its young. So I'm willing to trade. 7 children for 1 officer, Archibald Grimsby. The sirens were getting closer. I could see red and blue lights flashing through the fog and trees. In maybe 2 minutes, other officers would arrive, and this situation would explode into something that couldn't be contained or explained. "I need proof," I said. "Proof that you'll actually release them." Lavinia walked over to the sedan and reached into the back seat, pulling out a tablet device that looked normal, except for the way it bent light around its edges. She showed me the screen, which displayed multiple video feeds of children in various locations. Benjamin Winters was standing in his own backyard, looking confused, but very much alive and mobile. A teenage girl I recognized from a missing poster was sitting in a McDonald's, crying but free. 5 other children, all reported missing over the past 2 years, all suddenly back in the world. "We've released them temporarily," Lavinia explained. "If you agree to our terms, the release becomes permanent. If you refuse or try to trick us, they go back into the collection, and we take 7 more to replace them. You're monsters." "We're collectors," the Shadow Thing corrected, "and we're offering you a chance to save 7 young lives. That's more than most officers manage in their entire careers." The first patrol car came screaming into the parking lot. Officer Thaddeus Crow behind the wheel. Young guy, only been on the force for 2 years, still eager and by the book. He jumped out with his weapon drawn, saw me standing there with my gun out, the strange sedan with its pulsing light, and Lavinia in her impossible dress. "Arch, what's the situation?" "Stand down, Thaddeus," I called back, not taking my eyes off the Shadow Thing. "Just stand down and let me handle this." But Thaddeus was already moving forward, flashlight in one hand, weapon in the other. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from the vehicle. Sir, I need you to—" "What the hell?" He'd seen the Shadow Thing. His flashlight beam was passing right through it, illuminating nothing but void. "Interesting," the Shadow Thing said, turning its attention to Thaddeus. "Another one who can see. Rarer than I thought in such a small town. Arch, what is that thing?" Thaddeus's voice had gone up an octave, fear breaking through his training. "It doesn't matter," I said quickly. Thaddeus, get back in your car and leave now. I can't do that. Protocol says... Forget protocol, I snapped. This is beyond protocol. This is beyond anything the department has procedures for. Get in your car and leave, or things are going to get worse. But it was too late. More sirens were approaching. The entire night shift was probably heading this way. In minutes, we'd have half a dozen officers here, all seeing things that couldn't be explained, all potential new specimens for the collection. We need your answer, Lavinia said calmly. Once the others arrive, the offer changes. We'll take what we need and leave, with or without your cooperation. I thought about Benjamin Winters, 8 years old, frozen mid-run for potentially centuries. About the 6 other children I hadn't even seen, trapped in moments of terror or confusion or whatever else this thing found interesting about them. About my own kids, Elizabeth safe at Penn State, Marcus struggling in rehab but still alive, still free, still able to make choices and mistakes and live their lives. If I agree, I said slowly, what exactly happens to me? You become like me, Lavinia answered. Not immediately, but over time. You'll help us understand humanity better, help us choose specimens more carefully. You'll still be you, just enhanced, able to see and experience things beyond normal human perception. For how long? Forever, potentially, or until you bore us. I've been with him for 3 centuries and haven't bored him yet. 3 more patrol cars pulled into the lot, officers spilling out with weapons drawn. I recognized all of them. Patterson, Dabrowski, Clinton, Martinez. Good cops, all of them, with families and lives and no idea what they were walking into. Everybody stand down, I shouted. This is my scene. But they were already spreading out, trying to establish a perimeter, following their training. Patterson was calling for additional backup. Clinton was approaching the sedan with his weapon drawn. Martinez was trying to get a clear line of sight on the shadow thing. Time's up, the shadow thing said. What's your answer? I looked at my fellow officers, men and women I'd worked with for years, who were about to encounter something that would shatter their understanding of the world. I thought about the 7 children, probably already being pulled back to that impossible space because I'd hesitated too long. I thought about my ex-wife telling me I never knew when to stop trying to save everyone. Can I say goodbye first? I asked. To my kids? No, Lavinia said, not unkindly. Clean breaks are easier. You'll be able to watch them, though, from a distance. Make sure they're safe. Arch, what are you talking about? Thaddeus had moved closer, though he was keeping his distance from the shadow thing. Who are these people? I made my decision. I need all units to fall back to the park entrance, I said, loudly and clearly into my radio, using my command voice. 22 years on the force gave me seniority here. This is a federal matter. FBI is en route. Secure the perimeter, but do not approach the vehicle. It was a lie, but a believable one. The officers hesitated, looking between me and the strange scene before them. That's an order, I barked. Patterson, get everyone back. Set up a perimeter at the entrance. No one in or out until the feds arrive. Patterson, a 15-year veteran who trusted my judgment, started herding the others back. You heard him. Move out. Clinton, get those cars repositioned. Martinez, call dispatch and inform them we've got a federal situation. Only Thaddeus hesitated. Arch, what's really going on? Get out of here, Thaddeus. That's an order. He looked at me for a long moment, then at the shadow thing and Lavinia, then back at me. Something in my expression must have convinced him because he slowly backed away, though he kept glancing over his shoulder as he returned to his patrol car. Once the other officers were far enough away, I turned back to the shadow thing. I have conditions. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate," it said. "I'm the only one here who can see you clearly without going insane. That has to be worth something. So here are my terms. The 7 children go free permanently, no takebacks. You leave Millbrook Township alone, no more collecting from this area. And I get to send messages to my kids twice a year, just to let them know I'm okay." Lavinia and the shadow thing seemed to converse without words, a silent exchange that lasted maybe 3 seconds but felt like longer. "The children are already free," Lavinia said finally. "They'll stay that way. We can avoid Millbrook Township for, let's say, 50 years. After that, we make no promises. As for messages to your children, you can write letters. We'll ensure they're delivered, though they'll think you've simply disappeared, started a new life somewhere. It's kinder than the truth." "And what about the others? The adults in your collection?" "They stay," the shadow thing said firmly. "They're already adapted to their existence. Releasing them now would be cruel. They wouldn't know how to exist in linear time anymore." I wanted to argue, but I could see in Lavinia's eyes that this was non-negotiable. 7 children free was better than none, and maybe, if I went with them, I could find a way to help the others eventually. "One more thing," I said. "Officer Crow, Thaddeus. He saw you. He's going to have questions. Can you make him forget?" "We don't alter memories," Lavinia said. "It's messy and usually causes more problems than it solves. But we can give him something else to remember. A more plausible explanation that his mind will prefer to the truth. Do it." The shadow thing moved toward where Thaddeus sat in his patrol car, passing through the metal and glass like they weren't there. I saw Thaddeus stiffen, his eyes going wide, then relaxing as the shadow thing did something to his perception of the evening's events. When it returned, Thaddeus was slumped in his seat, unconscious but breathing. "He'll wake in a few minutes," the shadow thing said. "He'll remember a drug deal gone wrong, suspects who fled into the woods. Nothing supernatural, nothing that will haunt him." "Thank you." "Are you ready?" Lavinia asked, extending her hand to me. I looked back at the other patrol cars, their red and blue lights painting the fog in surreal colors. My fellow officers maintaining a perimeter for federal agents who would never come. My life, such as it was, waiting for me to return to it. The divorce papers still sitting on my kitchen table, the empty apartment, the photos of my kids that I looked at every night before bed. Will it hurt? The transformation? Yes, Lavinia said honestly. It's like being pulled apart and reassembled at a molecular level. But it's quick, and afterward you'll understand so much more, see so much more. The universe is far stranger and more wonderful than humans can imagine. I took off my badge and set it on the hood of my patrol car, then my service weapon, laying it carefully beside the badge. My radio, my cuffs, all the tools of a life I was about to leave behind. I pulled my wedding ring from my pocket, the one I still carried despite the divorce being final for 2 years, and left it with the rest. My replacement will find these, I said. They'll know I made a choice. Are you sure? Lavinia asked one final time. I thought about Benjamin Winters, probably at home now, confused and scared but free. 6 other children returned to their families with a story no one would believe, but alive to grow up and live their lives. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was the best I could manage. I'm sure. I took Lavinia's hand. Her skin was cold, not like death, but like the space between stars. The moment our hands touched, I felt the change begin. It started as a tingling, like an electric current running up my arm, then exploded through my entire body. She was right about the pain. It was excruciating, every cell seeming to come apart and reform into something else. But through the pain, I saw things. the real shape of the shadow thing, which wasn't a shadow at all but a being of such complex geometry that human eyes could only perceive it as an absence. The true nature of the sedan, which wasn't a car but a fold in space-time. A pocket dimension shaped vaguely like a vehicle because that's what our minds expected to see. And Lavinia herself, no longer quite human but not monster either, something in between, transformed by centuries of existing outside normal reality. The parking lot fell away, or maybe I fell away from it. The last thing I saw with human eyes was Patterson approaching my abandoned patrol car, finding my badge and gun, calling out my name with growing concern. Then my vision shifted, and I could see in spectrums that didn't have names, in directions that didn't exist in three-dimensional space. We were in the collection space again, but now I understood its geometry. It wasn't a room or a building, but a bubble outside normal space-time, connected to our reality by threads thinner than thought. The frozen people weren't actually frozen. They were experiencing time at a different rate, 1 second for them equaling years in normal time. From their perspective, they were barely beginning to blink or breathe or take a step, while outside their prisons the world spun on without them. "Welcome," the shadow thing said, and now I could hear its true voice. Not the approximation it had forced into my human brain, but something like music made of mathematics. "You're the 43rd human to make this choice over the millennia. Most don't last long, a century or two before they ask to be released. But some, like Lavinia, find purpose in the collecting." Purpose? My own voice sounded different, harmonics I'd never had before. "Preservation," Lavinia explained. "Earth won't last forever. Humanity won't last forever. But the collection will. When your sun burns out, when your species evolves beyond recognition or destroys itself, these specimens will remain. A perfect record of what humanity was at various points in its development." "A museum," I said, understanding. "You're creating a museum of humanity." "More than that," the shadow thing corrected. "We're creating an ark. Someday, when the conditions are right, when we find or create a suitable world, we'll release them all. Give humanity a second chance, but only the interesting ones, the special ones, the ones worth preserving." It was insane. It was monstrous. It was also, in a twisted way, almost noble. They weren't just collecting for the sake of collecting. They thought they were saving us from ourselves. "I want to see the children," I said, "the ones you freed. I need to know they're really safe." Lavinia gestured, and suddenly I could see through space itself. 7 windows into 7 different locations. Benjamin Winters being hugged by his sobbing mother. A teenage girl named Amanda Chen, not related to any Webb or Sarah, just a common surname, sitting in a police station, trying to explain where she'd been for the last 2 years. 5 other reunions, all tearful, all confused, but all real. "They won't remember the collection clearly," Lavinia explained. "Their minds will create false memories to fill the gaps. Kidnapping by normal humans, being lost in the woods. Anything more plausible than the truth, it's a kindness." "And my kids? Can I see them?" Another gesture, 2 more windows. Elizabeth in her dorm room at Penn State, studying for an exam, occasionally glancing at her phone as news of my disappearance presumably spread through the department. Marcus in his rehab facility, in group therapy, looking healthier than he had in years. Both safe, both free. Both thinking their father had abandoned them, but that was better than the truth. "You can watch them whenever you want," Lavinia said gently. "It helps, being able to see that they're okay." The shadow thing moved what might have been its head. "Now, we should leave this area. Your fellow officers will search for you, and it's better if they find nothing. No closure is painful, but it's better than finding something that breaks their understanding of reality. Where do we go? Everywhere, it said. We have collection sites across your planet and others. You'll help us understand which humans are worth preserving. Help us collect them humanely. In time, you might even convince us to change our methods, to be less traumatic for the specimens. And if I refuse to help? If I try to sabotage your collecting? Then we'll release you back into your normal reality, Lavinia said. But you won't be human anymore. You'll be something in between, unable to fully exist in either world. Most who try that go insane within days. It's why we ask for willing participation. So I was trapped, but trapped in a gilded cage with a view of everything I'd left behind. It wasn't the worst fate I could imagine, though it was close. We left Riverside Park through a fold in space that I was only beginning to understand how to perceive. Behind us, the investigation into my disappearance was beginning in earnest. They'd find my badge, my gun, my wedding ring. They'd find my patrol car with no signs of struggle. They'd search the woods for days, drag the river, interview everyone who'd known me. Eventually, they'd declare me missing, presumed dead or disappeared by choice. My ex-wife would tell people she wasn't surprised, that I'd always been running from something. My kids would grieve and move on. The department would put up a small memorial plaque, and life would continue. And I would watch it all from outside, learning to see reality from angles humans couldn't imagine, helping choose who would be preserved for humanity's potential future. It wasn't the life I'd chosen when I put on the badge 22 years ago, but it was the choice I'd made to save 7 children. In my first weeks as whatever to call what I'd become, Lavinia taught me how to navigate the spaces between spaces. The universe, I learned, was not one single reality, but infinite layers of overlapping possibilities, and we existed in the gaps between them. The shadow thing, whose actual name was a concept that translated roughly to preserver of variations, had been collecting specimens from various realities for eons, not just humans, but thousands of species, each stored in their own specialized environments. Your Earth is particularly interesting, it explained, as we moved through a collection hall filled with beings I couldn't even describe. Most realities that develop sentient life tend toward uniformity, but humans have such delightful variations, physical, mental, spiritual. Even your mundane specimens would be treasures in other realities. Then why not just observe? Why take them? Observation changes nothing. Preservation ensures continuity. Your species has a saying, history is written by the victors. We ensure that history includes everyone, not just those who survive whatever catastrophes await your world. Your species has a saying, history is written by the victors. We ensure that history includes everyone, not just those who survive, whatever catastrophes await your world. 3 months into my new existence, I witnessed my first new collection. We had traveled to a city I won't name, following what the preserver called probability threads, invisible currents that indicated where interesting variations might appear. Lavinia and I materialized in an alley behind a hospital at 3 a.m. Our forms shifted just enough to appear human to any security cameras, though, when I looked at my hands, I could see through them to the geometric patterns that now made up my true form. There, Lavinia pointed to a third-floor window. Room 314. A child born with complete cellular regeneration abilities. She heals from any injury within seconds. Her parents think it's a miracle. The government will think it's a weapon. Either way, her life will never be her own. She's a newborn, I protested, feeling something twist in what used to be my stomach. You can't take an infant from her parents. We're not taking her today. the preserver said, its shadow form rippling beside us like heat mirages off summer asphalt. We're marking her. We'll return when she's older, when the government discovers what she is, when they start the experiments. Then we'll offer her a choice, just as we offered you one. How many are you marking at any given time? Thousands, Lavinia answered, her voice carrying harmonics that human ears couldn't detect. Most will never be collected. They'll live normal lives, their variations never discovered or significant enough to preserve. But we watch, we wait, and when the moment is right, when they're at their most interesting or most threatened, we act. I thought about all the missing persons cases I'd investigated over the years. The patterns I'd never noticed before. Clusters of disappearances around military bases where they might have been doing experiments. Artists who vanished just as they were creating their masterworks. Scientists on the verge of breakthroughs that would have changed everything. Show me the oldest human in your collection, I said suddenly. They exchanged one of their wordless communications, vibrations and dimensions I was only beginning to perceive. Then the preserver gestured, opening another window in space. The tier in reality started as a pinpoint and expanded into an oval roughly the size of a door, its edges crackling with colors that didn't exist in normal human vision. Through it, I found myself looking at a man in Elizabethan dress, frozen mid-laugh at what appeared to be a tavern. His doublet was rich purple velvet, his beard precisely trimmed in the fashion of the era. Around him, other patrons were caught in various poses of merriment, but they were blurred, unimportant. Only he was in perfect focus. William Hartley collected in 1593, the preserver explained. He could compose symphonies in his mind and play them perfectly without ever touching an instrument. A variation in his temporal lobe that allowed perfect audio imagination and recall. He's been in the collection for over 400 years. Is he still aware? In his own way. Time passes so slowly for him that he's experienced perhaps 5 minutes of subjective time since his collection. To him, he's still in that tavern, still laughing at a joke his friend just told. He won't even realize anything's wrong for another century or two, subjectively speaking. It was horrible and merciful simultaneously. I began to understand that everything about the collection existed in these contradictions: preservation and imprisonment, salvation and damnation, kindness and cruelty. Can he hear us? I asked, moving closer to the window. No, the temporal differential is too great. To him, if he could perceive us at all, we would be moving so fast we'd be invisible. A lifetime of our observation would pass in less than his heartbeat. I stared at William Hartley's frozen laugh and wondered what joke had been so funny that it became his eternity. We spent the next year traveling, observing, occasionally collecting. I learned to spot the variations the preserver found interesting. They weren't always obvious. A woman in Tokyo whose dreams predicted stock market changes with 73% accuracy. She thought she was just lucky with her investments. A man in Lagos who could feel electromagnetic fields like a physical touch. He worked as an electrician and thought everyone could tell when wires were live without equipment. A child in Oslo who saw sounds as three-dimensional sculptures floating in the air. Her parents thought she was artistic, not synesthetic to a degree that shouldn't be possible. Most we only watched, but some, those in danger or at crucial moments, were offered the choice. The first collection I participated in was a teenager in Detroit named Jerome Wallace. 16 years old, brilliant, and cursed with the ability to see 37 seconds into the future. Not far enough to be truly useful, just far. Enough to live in constant déjà vu, to never be surprised, to watch every conversation happen twice. He was on the roof of his apartment building when we found him, standing at the edge, tears streaming down his face. "I've already seen this," he said without turning around. "All of it. You appearing. The woman with the strange eyes. The shadow that isn't really a shadow. The offer you're about to make. I saw it 37 seconds ago, and 37 seconds before that, and 37 seconds before that. My whole life is echoes of echoes." "Then you know what we're offering," Lavinia said gently. "Preservation. A single moment stretched forever. No more futures to see because time stops moving." He turned to face us, and I saw exhaustion that no 16-year-old should carry. "Do you know what it's like to never be present? To always be living half a minute ahead of everyone else?" "I know what it's like to live outside normal time," I said, finding my voice. "It's isolation. But so is what you're experiencing now. The difference is, your isolation has purpose. Mine is just torture." We talked for hours, or what felt like hours. Time moved strangely when the preserver was present. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes sideways. Jerome told us about watching his grandmother die 37 seconds before she actually passed. About seeing his first kiss before it happened, and how that ruined it. About the constant headaches from processing 2 time streams simultaneously. In the end, he chose collection. Not because he wanted to be preserved, but because he wanted the seeing to stop. The preserver took him gently, freezing him in a moment of rare peace, eyes closed, face relaxed. He was specimen number 7,893 in the North American collection. I started keeping my own records after that. Names and dates and locations of everyone we collected during my time with them. By the end of the first year, we'd added 17 new specimens to the collection. 17 people who chose preservation over whatever fate awaited them. I told myself I was helping them, giving them an option they wouldn't have had otherwise. But late at night, or whatever passed for night in the spaces between spaces, I wondered if I was just rationalizing my complicity in something monstrous. The infrastructure of the collection was more complex than I'd initially understood. It wasn't just one space, but thousands, each tailored to the specific requirements of different specimens. The humans were kept in areas that resembled Earth environments, rooms, buildings, landscapes frozen in time. But there were other sections for other species, places where physics worked differently, where consciousness existed without form, where time flowed backward or in spirals. Lavinia showed me her favorites, specimens from her 3 centuries of collecting. A Victorian medium who actually could speak to the dead. A World War I soldier who experienced time non-linearly, living his life in random order. A housewife from the 1950s who could step sideways into parallel versions of reality, visiting worlds where history had gone differently. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked her once as we cataloged a new acquisition, a concert pianist whose muscle memory extended to anything she observed, allowing her to perfectly replicate any physical action after seeing it once. "Regret implies I had better options," Lavinia replied, her fingers, which weren't really fingers anymore, dancing across the catalog interface. "My alternative was death from tuberculosis in 1721. 23 years old, coughing blood, feeling my lungs fill with fluid. The preserver offered me eternity. Even this strange, limited eternity is better than drowning in my own blood. But the people you've helped collect were all given the same choice, preservation or their fate. We don't take anyone against their will, Archibald. That's the one rule that's never broken. What about the ones who can't choose? The ones who are dying, unconscious?" She was quiet for a moment. "Those we preserve in hope. Hope that someday, when technology or medicine advances enough, they can be returned and healed. It's not perfect, but it's better than letting them die when preservation might mean future life. I wanted to argue, but I'd seen enough of the collection to know that simple moral judgments didn't apply here. The preserver operated on a timescale where human lifespans were eye blinks. From its perspective, it was creating an eternal archive of interesting variations in consciousness. From our perspective, it was kidnapping and imprisonment. Both were true simultaneously. The letters to my children were the hardest part. Twice a year, as agreed, I wrote to Elizabeth and Marcus. Simple messages on paper that appeared aged and traveled, though I wrote them in the sterile non-space of the collection. I'm okay. I love you. I'm sorry I had to. Leave the work I'm doing is important, but I can't explain it. Please don't look for me. They were delivered through mundane means, postmarked from different cities around the world: Prague, Cairo, Melbourne, Sao Paulo. Elizabeth hired a private investigator to track me down, but of course found nothing. The letters appeared in postal systems with no record of being mailed, bearing stamps that were real but somehow never caught on security cameras being purchased or applied. Marcus wrote back once, his handwriting shaky, probably writing between therapy sessions at the rehab center. Dad, I don't understand why you left, but I need you to know I'm getting better. 47 days clean. They say I should be angry at you for abandoning us, but mostly I'm just sad. I keep thinking about that night you drove me to rehab the second time, how you said you'd always be there. I guess always doesn't mean what I thought it did, but I'm staying clean this time. If you can't be here for me, I'll be here for myself. Cormac. I read that letter 1,000 times, each word a justified wound. In the collection's temporal framework, I could literally read it 1,000 times simultaneously, experiencing the pain fresh each time while also feeling it dull through repetition. It was during my second year that everything changed. We were in Mumbai, tracking a teenager named Ravi Patel, who could calculate probability outcomes with perfect accuracy. Not predictions exactly, but an ability to see all possible futures spreading from any decision point and calculate their likelihood down to infinite decimal places. The preserver called him a living quantum computer, though that didn't quite capture the elegant tragedy of his gift. Imagine seeing every possible outcome of every choice, knowing exactly what percentage chance you had of happiness, success, love, loss, death. We materialized in his family's apartment at 2 a.m., our forms shifted to be invisible to the sleeping parents and younger siblings. But Ravi was awake, sitting at his desk, surrounded by thousands of pieces of paper covered in probability calculations. I knew you were coming, he said without looking up. 97.3% probability of arrival tonight, 2.1% tomorrow, 0.6% probability you'd already taken me, and this is a false memory. But when we entered his room fully, someone else was already there. She stood in the corner like she'd always been there, though I knew she hadn't been visible moments before. She looked human, middle-aged, wearing a simple gray suit that seemed to exist in more dimensions than it should. Her hair was silver, pulled back in a style that belonged to no particular era, and her eyes were the color of the space between stars. "Hello, Preserver," she said, her voice hitting frequencies that made reality ripple like water. "Still playing with your toys, I see." The Preserver's form solidified more than I'd ever seen it, taking on an almost human shape, though one made of living shadow and geometric impossibilities. "Auditor, this sector is mine by right of first claim. Your claim expired 73 years ago by universal standard. You've been poaching." Lavinia stepped forward, her own form shifting to something more defensive, more dangerous. "We have treaties with the High Collectors. Sector 7749B is designated for preservation studies. Had treaties, the auditor corrected. Past tense. The high collectors were dissolved 16 years ago. You've been operating without authority, without oversight, without consent protocols. New management, new rules. Your little museum project is being shut down. You can't, I said, finding my voice despite the crushing pressure of the auditor's presence. There are thousands of people in stasis. If you shut down the collection... She turned to look at me, and I felt her gaze pierce through every layer of my transformed existence. Ah, a recent convert, how quaint. Officer Archibald Grimsby, taken October 15th, 2020. You sacrificed your humanity to save 7 children. Noble, if misguided. Tell me, officer, do you really think you're saving these people? Or are you just playing God with lives you have no right to control? We preserve unique variations, the preserver insisted, its form fluctuating with what I'd learned to recognize as agitation. When the thermal death comes, when entropy claims everything, the collection will remain. We're creating an arc for consciousness itself. The universe will end regardless, the auditor said, walking through Ravi's probability calculations without disturbing a single paper. Your collection won't prevent that. It might survive it, yes. But what then? An eternal museum with no visitors? Consciousness preserved, but never again experienced. You're just postponing the inevitable while stealing people's right to live their finite lives. She moved to where Ravi sat, still calculating, seemingly oblivious to our presence or choosing to ignore it. This boy, for instance? Yes, he can calculate probabilities. Do you know what he's calculating right now? The exact probability of his mother surviving her cancer diagnosis. 23.7% with current treatment, 31.2% with experimental therapy, 0.003% miraculous remission. He knows exactly how likely he is to lose her, down to the decimal point. And you want to preserve him in this moment of anguished calculation forever? He would be preserved at a moment of his choosing, Lavinia argued. Not this one. Ah, yes, the moment of choosing. Tell me, when someone is drowning, is choosing the life preserver really a choice? Or is it just survival instinct? You target people at their most vulnerable and offer them escape. That's not consent, it's exploitation. The auditor turned to me again. You have a unique perspective, officer. Fresh enough to remember humanity, but transformed enough to understand the collection. What do you think? Are you saving people or imprisoning them? I thought about Jerome Wallace, frozen in his moment of peace. About William Hartley, still laughing at a 400-year-old joke. About the 7 children I'd saved by taking their place. The answer wasn't simple, couldn't be simple. Both, I said finally. We're doing both. Saving some who would suffer worse fates, imprisoning others who might have found their own solutions. The collection is complicated. Complicated, the auditor repeated, and for the first time she smiled. It was not a comforting expression. Yes, that's accurate, which is why it needs to end. Complexity without consent is just elaborate cruelty. What happens to the specimens? I asked. If you shut down the collection, what happens to the thousands of preserved consciousness? They'll be returned, of course. Each one reintegrated to their point of origin, their memories adjusted to explain the gap. Some will resume lives interrupted. Others will face the deaths they were preserved to avoid. But all will have the chance to complete their natural existence. That's murder, the preserver said, its form expanding, becoming more threatening, returning terminal patients to their dying moments, sending people back to accidents, disasters, executions they were saved from. You're not freeing them, you're killing them. I'm returning them to their chosen timelines, the auditor replied calmly. Death is part of life. You've been interrupting the natural order, creating paradoxes and anomalies across multiple time streams. Do you have any idea how much energy it takes to maintain temporal consistency when you keep removing people from their proper moments? She gestured, and suddenly I could see it. The vast web of temporal corrections required to explain every disappearance. The reality patches covering the holes where collected people should have been. The increasing instability in the timeline itself. Every collection creates ripples, she explained. Small at first, but they compound. In approximately 127 years, if you continue at current rates, the temporal framework of this reality will collapse entirely. Is your museum worth the destruction of an entire timeline? The preserver was silent for a long moment, processing this information at speeds I couldn't follow. Finally, it spoke. We could reduce our collection rate. Take fewer specimens. Or, the auditor said, you could relocate to reality 9947X, where beings volunteer for preservation, where it's considered an honor to be collected. No coercion, no exploitation, just genuine consent. And the current collection will be dissolved and returned. As I said, it's not negotiable. She turned to me and Lavinia. You two have a choice. You can be returned to your human forms at the moment of your transformation, with memories intact or removed as you prefer. Or you can assist in the reintegration process. It's a complex undertaking. Thousands of specimens across multiple realities, all needing careful temporal insertion. We could use beings who understand both human psychology and collection mechanics. Lavinia's hand found mine, a gesture that was more energy transfer than physical touch. I can't go back, she whispered. 300 years. Everyone I knew is dust. My entire world is gone. But helping others return home? That has meaning. The preserver made a sound I'd never heard from it before, something like a sigh expressed in gravitational waves. I suppose it was inevitable. Nothing lasts forever, not even preservation itself. Very well, I'll relocate to 9947X, but I want assurances that the reintegration will be done carefully. Some of these specimens have been preserved for centuries. The shock of returning could destroy their minds. Which is why we need assistants who understand human psychology, the auditor said, looking at me. Your decision, Officer Grimsby? I thought about those frozen faces in the collection, aware and trapped for decades or centuries. About the families who never knew what happened to their loved ones. About my own children who deserved a father, even a flawed one, more than they deserved mysterious letters from nowhere. I want to go home, I said. But first, I want to help return the others. All of them. Make sure it's done right, that they're prepared, that their families are ready if possible. The auditor smiled again, and this time it was slightly less terrifying. Good answer. The work will take approximately 6 months subjective time, though only seconds will pass in your reality. Are you prepared for that? I nodded, and reality folded. The dissolution of the collection was the most complex thing I'd ever been part of. Each specimen had to be carefully extracted from their temporal bubble, their consciousness slowly readjusted to linear time, their memories edited to explain their absence in ways their minds could accept. Some had been preserved for so long that their original timelines no longer existed, requiring us to find compatible alternate realities where they could be inserted. William Hartley, the Elizabethan musician, was one of the most challenging. After 4 centuries, even at his slowed time rate, he'd begun to notice something was wrong. The laugh had started to feel forced, eternal, wrong. We had to construct an elaborate false memory of a tavern brawl, a head injury, lost time, recovery, and a monastery. He was returned to 1593, where he lived another 40 years and composed some of the most beautiful music of his era, though he always had nightmares about being trapped in a single moment forever. Jerome Wallace, the boy who saw 37 seconds into the future, chose something unexpected. Given the option to return to his moment of collection or to have his gift removed, he chose neither. Instead, he asked to be returned to a reality where his ability was known and understood, where there were others like him, where he could learn to control it rather than be controlled by it. The auditor found him a place in reality 3341-D, where temporal perception variations were common, and there were schools specifically for teaching precognitives. The 7 children I'd saved by taking Lavinia's deal were already free, but I watched as the auditor reinforced their return, ensuring no residual effects from their time in collection. Benjamin Winters would grow up normal, happy, with only vague nightmares about being frozen that would fade with time. For each return, I helped craft the cover stories, the false memories, the explanations that would satisfy without breaking minds. A businessman preserved in 1987 believed he'd been in a coma. An artist from 2003 thought she'd had a psychotic break and lost time. A scientist from 1969 was convinced he'd been in a classified government program he couldn't discuss. Not all returns were successful. Some specimens had been preserved at the moment of death and couldn't be returned to life. Others had been so fundamentally changed by their time in collection that they couldn't readjust to linear time. These were transferred to realities where non-linear existence was possible, where they could exist in their transformed states without being anomalies. Lavinia worked alongside me, her 3 centuries of experience invaluable in understanding the psychological impacts of long-term preservation. She chose not to return to human form, instead accepting a position with the Auditors Organization as a permanent liaison for temporal refugees. "I've been many things," she told me as we processed the last batch of specimens. "A colonial wife, a collection assistant, and now this. Each transformation has taught me something. Being human was about feeling. Being collected was about observing. This is about helping. I think I prefer helping." The preserver, meanwhile, prepared for its relocation. It showed me its new collection space in Reality 9947-X, where beings made of pure thought volunteered to be preserved, considering it a form of meditation. No coercion, no exploitation, just consciousness choosing to pause itself for contemplation. "It's not the same," it admitted. Voluntary specimens lack the spontaneity, the surprise of discovered variations. But perhaps that's better. Surprise obtained through exploitation is tainted. This will be cleaner. When the last specimen was returned, the collection space began to dissolve. The impossible geometries folded in on themselves, dimensions collapsing like a house of cards in reverse. The preserver departed first, sliding sideways through reality toward its new home. Lavinia hugged me, a strange sensation given our transformed states, and whispered, "Remember us as we were, not as we became." The auditor stood with me as the final collapse began. "You're ready to return?" "Yes. Send me back to the morning after I disappeared. Let me have been missing for one night. My kids need to know I didn't just abandon them. That can be arranged. You'll wake in the woods near Riverside Park at dawn, with injuries consistent with pursuing suspects and getting lost. Your memories of this experience can be retained or removed." "Retained," I said immediately. Someone needs to remember. Someone needs to know what's out there, what's possible, what choices exist beyond the normal. That will make your life more difficult. You'll see shadows where others see nothing. You'll recognize patterns others miss. you'll know that reality is far more fragile and strange than most humans can accept. I know, but maybe that knowledge will help someone someday. Maybe there will be other collections, other offers, other impossible choices, and I'll be able to help. The auditor nodded. Very well, memory's intact, but I'm adding a protection. The knowledge won't drive you mad, and you'll be able to function normally despite what you know. Consider it compensation for your assistance. The transformation back to humanity was agony. Every enhanced perception was stripped away, every ability to see beyond normal reality removed, leaving me feeling blind and deaf and incredibly small. My consciousness, which had existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, was compressed back into a single brain, a single timeline, a single limited perspective. But I was also real again, solid, present, human. I woke in the woods near Riverside Park at dawn, October 16th, 2020, wearing the same uniform I'd had on the night before, though now it was torn and dirty. My badge and gun were back in their holsters. My wedding ring was in my pocket. To the world, I'd been missing for less than 8 hours. The story I told was simple and believable. I'd pursued suspects into the woods, gotten lost in the fog, hit my head on a low branch, wandered in confusion until dawn. The hospital confirmed a mild concussion, consistent with my story. There were enough real injuries, scratches from branches, bruised ribs from a fall I didn't remember, that gash on my head, to make it convincing. The department was so relieved to have me back alive that they didn't question the story too closely. Thaddeus, his memories already altered by the preserver before the auditor's intervention, corroborated seeing suspects flee into the trees. He remembered a drug deal, men with guns, a chase that I'd insisted on handling alone. My ex-wife brought Elizabeth and Marcus to see me in the hospital. The relief on their faces was worth every moment of agony I'd experienced. Dad. Elizabeth threw herself into my arms, crying. We thought, when you didn't come home, when they found your car empty, we thought you were gone. I'm here, I said, holding her tight. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Marcus stood back at first, his recovery making him cautious about emotional displays. But when I held out my hand, he took it, gripping it like he was afraid I'd disappear again. You scared us, he said quietly. Really scared us. I know, I'm sorry, it won't happen again. Promise. I promise. I meant it. Whatever else happened, whatever strange things I might encounter in the future, I would never voluntarily leave them again. The 7 children who'd been freed from the collection remained free, their families grateful for miracles they couldn't explain. Benjamin Winter's parents were on the news, talking about their joy at his return, how he'd been found wandering in a park with no memory of where he'd been. The other 6 had similar stories, gaps in memory explained by trauma, drugs, head injuries, anything but the truth. The department put me on administrative leave for 2 weeks, standard procedure after a traumatic incident. I spent that time with my kids, rebuilding bridges I'd let deteriorate during the divorce. Elizabeth showed me her college applications, her dreams of becoming a teacher. Marcus introduced me to his sponsor, talked about his recovery process, the steps he was taking to stay clean. When I returned to work, everything was different yet the same. The night shift still stretched long and quiet. The calls still came in, domestics, traffic stops, the occasional weird report that turned out to be nothing. But I saw more now, understood more. Sometimes, on very quiet nights, I could feel the thin places where reality wasn't quite solid. I could sense when something from outside normal existence was passing through. Usually, it was harmless. Beings traveling between realities, observers studying our world, refugees from collapsed timelines seeking new homes. I let them pass without interference, understanding now that our reality was just one of infinite variations, and not everyone who seemed strange was dangerous. But occasionally, maybe 3 or 4 times in the 5 years since that night, I've encountered something that required intervention. The first was 6 months after my return. A woman called about strange lights in an abandoned building, voices speaking languages that hurt to hear. I found another preserver, not ours but a younger one, trying to establish a new collection site. I explained about the auditor, about the new rules, about consent and temporal stability. It left without taking anyone, seeking a reality where preservation was voluntary. The second was a year later. A child who could see probability threads like Ravi Patel, but without the ability to process them, was being driven mad by the constant flow of potential futures. Something was circling her, waiting for her to break completely before collecting her. I intervened, not with force but with information, explaining to the entity that taking her would violate the consent protocols, that the auditor would investigate, that there would be consequences. It retreated, and I got the girl help from a therapist who, I suspected, knew more about unusual perceptions than her credentials suggested. The third was the hardest. 2 years ago, I was called to a welfare check on an elderly man who hadn't been seen in days. I found him in conversation with something that looked like Lavinia had looked. Human, but not, offering him preservation, eternal existence beyond his failing body. "It's not a bad offer," he told me when I explained what was really being proposed. "I'm 91, my heart's failing, my mind's starting to go. They're offering me eternity with my memories intact. Why shouldn't I take it?" "Because eternity isn't living," I said. "It's just existing. No growth, no change, no surprises. Every moment the same forever. Sounds peaceful. Peaceful and purposeless. You'd be a museum piece, observed, but not experiencing." We talked for 3 hours while the entity waited patiently. In the end, he chose to stay, to die, naturally, in a few months surrounded by the grandchildren he'd only recently reconnected with. The entity left without argument, respecting his choice. Each encounter reinforced what I'd learned during my time with the collection. The universe was vast and strange, full of beings with incomprehensible motivations and abilities. But at the core of every interaction was choice, the right to choose our own path, even if that path led to death, suffering, or loss. That's what made us human, not our biology, but our ability to choose despite not knowing all the outcomes. Last week, I got a package with no return address, no postmark, no evidence of having gone through any postal system. Inside was a photograph that shouldn't exist. Couldn't exist according to normal physics. It showed Lavinia standing in what looked like the Northern Lights, if the Northern Lights existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. She was wearing that same impossible dress from the night in the parking lot, but now it seemed to suit her perfectly, as if she'd finally grown into what she'd become. On the back, in handwriting that existed in more dimensions than paper should allow, "The work continues. 12,847 specimens successfully reintegrated across 347 realities. The universe is vast and full of wonders and terrors, but choice makes us more than either. Thank you for reminding us that preservation without consent is not preservation at all, until we meet again in whatever form that takes." -L. There was something else in the package. A small device no bigger than a phone, made of materials that seemed to shift between states of matter. When I touched it, I heard the auditor's voice. "This is a beacon. If you encounter something beyond normal parameters, something that threatens consent or temporal stability, activate it. We'll investigate. Consider yourself a consultant, Officer Grimsby. The universe needs those who can bridge the gap between human and other, between normal and impossible. The pay is terrible, the hours are worse, but the work matters. I keep the device in my patrol car now, hidden behind the radio where no one else will find it. I've never had to use it, but knowing it's there, knowing there's backup if things go truly wrong, helps me sleep better. My children are adults now. Elizabeth graduated last year, got her teaching certificate, started work at an elementary school, where she's already known for her ability to reach the difficult kids, the ones who see the world differently. I wonder sometimes if she inherited something from my experience, some ability to perceive beyond the normal, but if she has, she's never mentioned it. Marcus has been clean for 5 years now. He works as a counselor at the same rehab facility where he got clean, helping others find their way back from the edge. He still has my letters from when I was transformed, keeps them in a folder marked Dad's Lost Year. He's never asked me about them directly, but sometimes he looks at me like he knows there's more to the story than a concussion and a night lost in the woods. I still work the night shift. Millbrook Township is still strange, still sits on some confluence of realities that makes the impossible slightly more probable. But now I understand that strangeness can work with it rather than against it. Officer Thaddeus Crow transferred to day shift after 6 months. The altered memories held, but some part of him remembered that night. Remembered seeing something that shouldn't exist. He couldn't handle the night anymore, couldn't stop jumping at shadows that might not be shadows. He's happier in daylight, where things are more solid, more certain. Chief Patterson retired last year, and they offered me his position. I turned it down. The night shift is where I'm needed, where my unique understanding of what's out there can do the most good. The new chief, a transfer from Pittsburgh named Harrison, thinks I'm crazy for preferring nights, but respects my seniority enough not to push. Sometimes young officers ask me for advice about the weird calls, the ones that don't quite fit in the report forms. I tell them what I told myself all those years ago. The world is stranger than you know. There are things beyond the veil that defy explanation. Some mean harm, some mean to help in ways we can't accept, and some are just passing through. Do your job, I tell them. Protect and serve. But remember that sometimes protecting people means making choices that can't go in the official report. Sometimes it means accepting that not everything can be fixed with handcuffs and Miranda rights. And sometimes, very rarely, it means making a deal with something impossible to save something irreplaceable. They usually laugh, think I'm telling cop stories exaggerating for effect. But occasionally, one of them looks at me differently, like they've seen something too, something that didn't fit their understanding of the world. Those are the ones I watch, the ones I make sure to partner with on the really strange calls. They're the ones who might someday need to know what I know. The world hasn't ended. The timeline hasn't collapsed. As far as I know, the preserver is happily collecting voluntary specimens in Reality 9947-X. Lavinia is helping temporal refugees find new homes across the multiverse. And the auditor is maintaining the balance between preservation and exploitation. But Earth, our Earth, reality, Prime as the auditor called it, continues to spin. People are born, live, die, mostly unaware of the vast strangeness surrounding them. And that's as it should be. Most people aren't equipped to handle the knowledge that reality is optional, that consciousness can exist in forms we can't imagine, that there are beings out there who see us the way we see insects. Interesting, worth studying, but ultimately expendable. That's where I come in, standing on the thin line between normal and impossible, between human and other. A small-town cop who once spent 6 months as something beyond human, helping to free thousands of preserved souls. A father who sacrificed his humanity to save 7 children and got it back as a reward for good service. A man who knows that monsters are real, but also knows that sometimes the monsters are trying to help in the only way they know how. Last night, I was parked in my usual spot behind the old Tasty Freeze, watching the empty highway, when my radio crackled with a familiar call. Unit 7. We've got a report of a suspicious vehicle at Riverside Park, North Parking Area. Different dispatcher. Meredith retired 2 years ago. But the same location, the same vague report of something wrong about a vehicle. My hand went to the beacon device, but I didn't activate it. Not yet. Unit 7 responding, I said, starting my cruiser. The drive was the same, though they'd repaved the road and cut back some of the trees. The park entrance had new gates, stronger locks, security cameras that the city council had insisted on after my disappearance 5 years ago. The north parking area was empty except for a single vehicle. Not a sedan this time, but a van. The kind that should be white or gray, but seemed to be a color that didn't quite exist. The interior light was on, pulsing with a rhythm I recognized. I parked, grabbed my flashlight, and approached carefully. Through the window, I could see personal effects scattered across the seats. A wallet, a watch, a pair of glasses. But no one inside, no shadow figure, no transformed human. "I know you're here," I said to the empty air. "I can feel the reality fold. Show yourself." The air shimmered, and a figure materialized. Not the preserver, not Lavinia, but something new. It looked like a child, maybe 10 years old, but its eyes were ancient, full of stars being born and dying. "Officer Grimsby," it said in a voice like wind chimes. "I've heard of you." The human who chose, and was chosen. "I have a proposition." "I'm listening." "There's a child 3 towns over. She sees the spaces between atoms, the quantum foam, where particles appear and disappear. It's driving her mad. Her parents think she's schizophrenic. The doctors want to medicate her until she can't see anything at all. I can take her somewhere where her sight is normal, valued, where she can learn to use it. Or she goes on medication, loses her gift, lives a normal life. Maybe happy, maybe not, but definitely not what she could be. How old? 12. Can she consent? Does she understand what you're offering? She understands that the world is bigger than humans know. She understands that staying means losing part of herself, and leaving means losing everything else. I thought about Elizabeth at 12, angry about the divorce, shutting herself in her room. About Marcus at 12, already showing signs of the addiction that would nearly destroy him. About all the 12-year-olds who felt like they didn't fit, who saw the world differently, who were told they were wrong or sick or broken. "I want to meet her," I said, "talk to her myself. If she truly understands and truly chooses, I won't stop you. But if she's being coerced, manipulated, or is incapable of real consent, you leave. Those are the rules now." The child thing smiled, and for a moment I saw its true form, something geometric and impossible and beautiful. "You really are what they say, the bridge between worlds. Very well, Officer Grimsby. You may meet her. But know this, there are more like her every year. Evolution is accelerating. Humans are developing abilities that don't fit your current reality. Soon, you'll have to choose. Suppress them to maintain normalcy, or let reality itself change to accommodate them. We'll deal with that when it happens." "No," it said, already beginning to fade. "You're dealing with it now. Every choice you make, every child you save or don't save, every entity you allow or prevent from collecting, you're shaping what humanity becomes. You're not just a bridge, officer. You're an architect of the future." It vanished, leaving only the van with its scattered personal effects and pulsing light. I gathered the items as evidence, called in the abandoned vehicle, and went through the motions of a normal investigation. But the child thing's words echoed in my mind. Maybe it was right. Maybe every choice I made was shaping humanity's future. But that's what police work had always been, hadn't it? Making choices that affected lives, communities, futures. The scale was just bigger now, the consequences more strange. I finished my shift as the sun rose, painting the sky in colors that reminded me of the space between spaces. Somewhere out there, Lavinia was helping lost souls find new homes. The preserver was building its voluntary collection. The auditor was maintaining the balance, and here on Earth, reality was getting stranger, thinner, more flexible. But that's tomorrow's problem. Today, I'm going to have breakfast with my daughter before her first class. I'm going to call my son and congratulate him on his 5-year chip. I'm going to sleep in my human bed in my human apartment and dream human dreams. And tonight, I'll put on my badge and gun, get in my patrol car, and drive out into the darkness to stand watch on the border between normal and impossible. Because someone has to, because I chose to, because even after everything I've seen and been and done, I still believe that protecting and serving means something. Even if sometimes what you're protecting people from, or protecting them for, defies every law except the one that matters most. The right to choose your own path, no matter how strange that path might be. The radio crackles. Another call. Another suspicious vehicle, strange lights, something wrong that the caller can't quite explain. Unit 7 responding, I say, and drive off into the night, toward whatever impossible thing waits for me in the darkness. Some nights, that's enough. Most nights, that's everything. The story continues, will always continue, as long as there are those who stand watch at the boundaries of what we call real. I'm Officer Archibald Grimsby, and I'll be here as long as I'm needed, which, given what I know about what's coming, will be a very long time indeed.